Hey guys, tonight we step back more than 300 years to walk the cramped, filthy, surprisingly vibrant streets of colonial New York City. Imagine the year is somewhere in the early 1700s, and you have just opened your eyes in a tiny wooden house on the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The air smells like wood smoke, animal dung, and something vaguely rotten drifting up from the alley outside your window. A rooster is screaming somewhere nearby, and you can hear the distant clatter of a cart rolling over cobblestones, or more likely squelching through mud. This is your life now, and honestly, you probably won't survive it. Between the smallpox, the contaminated water, the fires that could consume an entire block in 20 minutes, and the general chaos of colonial existence, making it to your 40th birthday would be considered a genuine achievement. But don't worry, we're going to take this journey together, nice and slow, and I promise to keep things cozy even when the history gets a little grim. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing how this little community stretches across the globe, from midnight listeners in Tokyo to afternoon nappers in Sao Paulo. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You become aware of consciousness slowly, reluctantly, the way a person does when sleep has been too short and the world is too cold. Your eyes open to near total darkness. There is no gentle sunrise streaming through curtains, no alarm clock buzzing on a nightstand. Instead, there is the faint grey suggestion of dawn creeping through a small, oiled paper window, because glass is expensive and you are not wealthy. The room around you is tiny, perhaps 10 feet by 12, and you share it with at least 2 other people. Maybe siblings, maybe a spouse and child, maybe a fellow boarder who pays a few shillings a week for the privilege of sleeping on a straw pallet near the door. Privacy, as you understand it from your modern sensibilities, simply does not exist here. The first thing that hits you, even before you fully sit up, is the smell. It is a complex bouquet that your 21st century nose finds absolutely devastating. There is the chamber pot in the corner, which has been accumulating contributions throughout the night and will not be emptied until someone carries it outside to dump in the street or the nearest privy. There is the lingering odour of last night's cooking fire, a mixture of wood smoke and rendered animal fat that has seeped into every fibre of your clothing and bedding. There is the mustiness of the straw mattress beneath you, which has not been changed in months and has become a thriving ecosystem of its own. And underneath it all, there is the general miasma of unwashed human bodies, because bathing is infrequent, deodorant does not exist, and everyone just sort of accepts that people smell like people. You push yourself upright, and your body immediately protests. The mattress, if you can call it that, is a linen sack stuffed with straw, resting on a simple wooden frame with rope supports. If you're slightly more prosperous, you might have a feather bed layered on top, which sounds luxurious until you realise that feather beds were rarely cleaned and tended to become lumpy, flattened, and infested with various tiny creatures over time. The rope supports beneath the mattress need to be tightened regularly, which is actually where the phrase sleep tight comes from, a little etymological gift from your ancestors who understood that a sagging bed made for a miserable night. The room is cold, bitterly, bone-achingly cold if it is winter, and merely chilly if it is one of the milder months. There is a small fireplace in the corner, but the fire died down hours ago, and no one has risen yet to coax it back to life. You can see your breath in the dim light, and you instinctively pull your blanket, a coarse woolen thing that itches against your skin, a little tighter around your shoulders. Historians still argue whether colonial New York has suffered more from the brutal winters or the sweltering summers, but in this moment, shivering in the grey pre-dawn, you're absolutely certain that winter is the greater enemy. Somewhere outside, you hear the night watchman making his final rounds. He's calling out the time and the weather in a voice that echoes off the wooden buildings. 4 o'clock and all is well. Clear morning, cold night. The night watch is a civic duty that citizens take in rotation, and the quality of watchmen varies dramatically. Some are diligent souls who genuinely patrol the streets looking for fires, criminals and disturbances. Others are elderly men who mostly nap in doorways and make their calls from memory, without actually checking anything. The watch will be relieved soon, and the city will begin its daily transformation from a sleeping village to a bustling port town. You force yourself to swing your legs over the side of the bed, and your feet touch a wooden floor that feels like ice. Shoes are not worn to bed, that would be absurd, but you wish desperately that you had thought to leave your stockings within reach. You fumble in the darkness for your clothing, which you left draped over a chair or hanging from a peg on the wall. Everything is slightly damp, as things tend to be in houses that lack proper insulation and climate control. The linen shift you slept in, a long loose garment that serves as both pyjamas and underwear, is clammy against your skin. As you begin the process of dressing, which we will explore in much greater detail shortly, you become aware of the sounds of the household stirring around you. Someone is coughing in the next room. A baby is crying somewhere. That thin, reedy wail that suggests hunger or discomfort, or simply the general injustice of being an infant in the 18th century. Footsteps creak on the floorboards above your head, and you hear the unmistakable sound of someone using a chamber pot with absolutely no attempt at discretion. Welcome to communal living colonial style. The house itself is a modest wooden structure, 2 or perhaps 3 stories tall, with a steep gabled roof designed to shed snow and rain. It sits on a narrow lot, pressed close against its neighbours on either side, facing a street that is barely wide enough for 2 carts to pass. The ground floor likely contains a shop or workshop of some kind. This is nearer when most people live where they work, and the upper floors are divided into living quarters for the family and whatever tenants or servants share the space. The construction is timber frame, with walls of wooden planks or sometimes a mixture of clay and straw. Fire is a constant danger, and you try not to think about how quickly this entire building could become an inferno if a spark landed in the wrong place. You make your way to the window and push open the wooden shutter just a crack, letting in a sliver of grey morning light and a gust of cold air that makes you gasp. Outside, the street is beginning to come alive. A servant girl is emptying a chamber pot into the gutter, contributing to the fragrant stream of waste that runs down the centre of the lane. A man is leading a cow toward the common pasture, and the animal's hooves squelch in the mud with each step. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith is already at work, and you can hear the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil drifting through the morning air. The city is waking up, and you, whether you like it not, must wake with it. This is New York in the 1700s, a small, scrappy, endlessly ambitious town clinging to the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The population is somewhere between 5 and 25,000, depending on exactly when in the century we have landed, which makes it one of the largest cities in British North America, but laughably tiny by modern standards. The Dutch founded this place as New Amsterdam back in 1626, and their influence lingers everywhere, in the architecture, in the language, in the stubborn canal system that still cuts through certain neighbourhoods. The English took over in 1664, renamed everything, and have been trying to impose their own order on this chaotic little settlement ever since. The result is a city that feels perpetually caught between identities, neither fully Dutch nor fully English nor fully anything else, just a noisy, smelly, wonderfully alive jumble of humanity trying to make a living on the edge of a vast wild continent. You close the shutter and turn back to face the day. Your stomach is growling, your bladder is insisting on attention, and there is work to be done. But first, you need to put on some clothes that are appropriate for public viewing, and that, my friend, is going to be an adventure all on its own. You step outside into the street, and immediately you understand why colonial New Yorkers spent so much time complaining about the roads. The ground beneath your feet is not pavement in any modern sense. It is a churned, rutted, semi-liquid mess of dirt, mud, animal waste, kitchen slop, and whatever else has been dumped or dropped here over the past several days. In dry weather, the streets become clouds of choking dust that coat everything and everyone in a fine layer of grime. In wet weather, which is far more common, they transform into shallow rivers of muck that can swallow a shoe or trap a cartwheel without warning. You pick your way forward carefully, trying to stay close to the buildings where the ground is slightly more solid. And you understand viscerally why wealthy colonists hire servants just to walk ahead of them and clear a path. The layout of the city makes no sense to your modern eyes. This is not the orderly grid that will eventually define Manhattan, with its numbered streets and predictable avenues. That rational system will not arrive until 1811, more than a century from now. Instead, you're navigating a maze of narrow lanes and crooked alleys that seem to have been designed by drunk cattle, which, in a sense, they were. Many of these streets began as cowpaths or Native American trails, and they meander according to ancient logics that have nothing to do with efficiency or urban planning. Some streets dead-end without warning, others curve back on themselves in ways that leave you perpetually disoriented. The Dutch laid out the original settlement with their characteristic practicality, but as the city has grown, new streets have been added haphazardly, and the result is a navigational nightmare. The names of the streets are equally chaotic, and they change constantly. What was called one thing last year might be called something else this year, depending on which prominent citizen has recently died, which official has taken offence at the old name, or simply which designation has caught on among the locals. Some streets have multiple names that different people use interchangeably. Maps exist, but they are expensive, often inaccurate, and of limited use when half the population is illiterate and gives directions by landmarks rather than street names anyway. Turn left at the big oak tree, go past the house where old Mrs. Brule van der Berg used to live before she died of the flux, and it's the third building after the tavern with the broken shutter. That is how navigation works here. You pass a group of pigs rooting through a pile of garbage in the middle of the street, and you give them a wide berth. Pigs are everywhere in colonial New York, and they serve a dual purpose. On one hand, they are a valuable source of food. Pork is a staple of the colonial diet, and many families keep pigs even in the heart of the city. On the other hand, they function as a primitive waste disposal system, eating the kitchen scraps and spoiled food that accumulates in the streets. The city has made several attempts to regulate the pig population, passing ordinances that require pigs to be kept penned or ringed, that is, with a metal ring through their nose to prevent them from rooting. But enforcement is sporadic at best. The pigs roam freely, and pedestrians learn to watch their step. Dogs are equally ubiquitous, though they serve a different function. Every household seems to have at least one dog, often several, and they range from pampered lapdogs kept by wealthy merchants' wives to half-feral curs that survive on scraps and sleep in doorways. The dogs bark constantly, at each other, at strangers, at passing carts, at nothing in particular, and they add to the general cacophony that defines street life. Cats are present too, though they tend to keep a lower profile, haunting the warehouses and cellars where they wage an endless war against the rat population. Speaking of rats, you see several scurrying along the edge of a building, and you suppress a shudder. Rats are a fact of life in colonial New York as they are in every pre-modern city, and they thrive in the accumulating filth. They carry diseases, destroy stored food, and occasionally bite sleeping infants, but there is little anyone can do about them except keep cats and hope for the best. The same is true of the flies that swarm around every pile of manure, every open privy, every butcher's stall. Insects are so omnipresent that people barely notice them anymore, swatting absently at their faces as they go about their business. The buildings that line the streets are a hodgepodge of architectural styles, reflecting the city's complicated history. Some are clearly Dutch in origin, tall, narrow structures with distinctive stepped gables and steep roofs. Their facades oriented toward the street with decorative brickwork that speaks of old-world craftsmanship. These buildings often have their origins in the New Amsterdam era, though many have been modified and expanded over the decades. Others are more English in style, with simpler facades and lower-pitched roofs, built by the wave of settlers who arrived after the 1664 takeover. Still others defy easy categorization, cobbled together from whatever materials were available at the time, their origins lost to memory. The buildings press close together, separated by narrow alleys that are even more treacherous than the main streets. These alleys serve as informal garbage dumps, outdoor toilets, and shortcuts for those brave or desperate enough to use them. They are dark even in daylight, permanently shadowed by the structures on either side, bestos, and they harbour a population of beggars, drunks, and petty criminals who prefer to conduct their business away from public view. You do not venture into the alleys unless you absolutely must. As you walk, you begin to notice the signage that identifies the various businesses. Literacy is not universal, so most shops and taverns identify themselves with pictorial signs rather than written names. A boot hanging above a doorway indicates a cobbler. A striped pole marks a barber surgeon who can trim your hair and pull your teeth with equal enthusiasm. A sheaf of wheat suggests a baker, while a golden arm holding a hammer announces a goldsmith or silversmith. These signs swing in the breeze, creaking on their iron brackets, and they create a kind of visual language that even the illiterate can read. The more elaborate the sign, generally speaking, the more prosperous the business. You pass the intersection of two major streets, and for a moment the chaos intensifies. Carts are trying to pass each other in a space that was clearly designed for foot traffic only, and the drivers are shouting curses in at least 3 different languages. A woman is trying to cross with a basket of eggs balanced on her head, and she nearly collides with a man leading a horse toward the stable. A street vendor is hawking oysters from a wooden tray, oysters cheap and plentiful in colonial New York, so abundant that they are considered food for the poor, and his voice adds to the general din. Historians still argue whether colonial New York was more crowded than other cities of comparable size, but in this moment, you cannot imagine how it could possibly be worse. You notice, just not for the first time, that the streets have a distinct topography of filth. Down the centre of most lanes runs a shallow channel or gutter, designed to carry away rainwater and waste. In theory, this system should keep the streets relatively clean, channeling the muck toward the rivers that surround the island. In practice, the gutters are frequently clogged with debris, and they become stagnant pools of festering garbage that breed flies and disease. When it rains heavily, the gutters overflow, spreading their contents across the entire street and into the ground floors of nearby buildings. Flooding is a chronic problem, and the low-lying areas near the waterfront are especially vulnerable. The waterfront itself is not far away. Nothing in this compact city is far from anything else, and you can smell it before you see it. The tang of salt water mingles with the odour of fish, tar and rotting vegetation that accumulates along the shoreline. The wharves and docks are the economic heart of New York, the reason this city exists at all, and we will spend more time there later. For now, you catch just a glimpse of masts rising above the rooftops, a forest of wooden spars that speaks of commerce and connection to the wider world. You turn down a side street, seeking a slightly less congested route, and you find yourself in a neighbourhood that feels almost residential. The houses here are a bit larger, set back slightly from the street, with small gardens or yards behind wooden fences. Chickens scratch in the dirt and you can hear the bleating of goats somewhere nearby. Even in the heart of the city, people keep animals, not just pigs and dogs, but cows, sheep, horses and poultry of every description. The line between urban and rural is blurry here, almost non-existent. A wealthy merchant might keep a cow in his backyard for fresh milk, while a poor labourer might share his one-room dwelling with a pig destined for the autumn slaughter. You pause for a moment to get your bearings, looking up at the sky to judge the time. There are no public clocks in most neighbourhoods, and personal timepieces are luxury items that only the wealthy can afford. Most people tell time by the sun, by the church bells that ring at regular intervals, and by the general rhythm of daily life. It is mid-morning now, judging by the angle of the light, and you have places to be. The streets will only get more crowded as the day progresses, so you quicken your pace and press forward, dodging a puddle of something you prefer not to examine too closely. You stand before a small, cracked mirror, a luxury item that costs more than most people earn in a month, and you contemplate the ordeal of getting dressed. In your 21st century life, getting dressed is a matter of minutes. Grab a shirt, pull on some pants, maybe tie your shoes if you're feeling particularly formal. Here in the 1700s, dressing is a multi-step production that can take the better part of an hour, requires assistance from others for certain garments, and involves more layers than you ever thought possible. Clothing is not just fabric here. It is a statement, a uniform, a social marker that tells everyone who sees you exactly where you stand in the colonial hierarchy. Let us start from the inside and work our way out, the way you must every single morning. The foundation garment for almost everyone, man, woman and child alike, is the shift, sometimes called a chemise. This is a loose, knee-length or ankle-length garment made of linen worn directly against the skin. You slept in your shift last night, as most people do, and it serves as both underwear and pyjamas. The shift absorbs sweat and body oils, protecting the outer garments that are more expensive and harder to clean. You might own 2 or 3 shifts if you're of modest means, changing into a fresh one once or twice a week, or you might own a dozen if you are wealthy enough to have servants doing laundry regularly. The shift is the one garment that actually gets washed with any frequency, though washed in this context means pounded with rocks or scrubbed on a washboard in cold water with harsh lye soap. Over the shift, if you are a woman, comes the stays. Stays are the 18th century version of a corset, though they function somewhat differently than the waist-cinching torture devices of the Victorian era. Colonial stays are designed less to create an exaggerated hourglass figure and more to provide support and posture, flattening the bust and straightening the spine into the rigid, upright carriage that is considered proper and attractive. They are constructed from layers of linen or canvas, stiffened with strips of whalebone or sometimes wood or metal, and they lace up the back, which means you absolutely cannot put them on by yourself. You need another person, a servant, a sister, a mother, a friend, to pull the laces tight and tie them off. This is one reason why wealthy women have ladies' maids and poorer women develop strong relationships with their neighbours. Men do not wear stays, but they have their own foundational layers to contend with. Over the shift comes the waistcoat, a close-fitting vest that buttons up the front and provides both warmth and decoration. The waistcoat is often the most visible and most ornate part of a man's outfit, since the coat worn over it is typically left open to display the waistcoat beneath. A fashionable gentleman might own waistcoats embroidered with silk thread, decorated with metal buttons, or made from expensive imported fabrics. A working man's waistcoat is simpler, made from sturdy wool or linen, but it is still an essential part of the outfit that no respectable person would appear in public without. Now come the breeches, the knee-length pants that are standard male attire throughout the century. Breeches fasten at the waist with buttons or a drawstring and buckle just below the knee, where they meet the stockings. The fit varies by fashion and by class. Tighter, more tailored breeches for the wealthy. Looser, more practical cuts for workers. But the basic form remains consistent. You pull on your breeches over your shift and fasten them carefully, checking that the full front, a flap that buttons at the waist, functioning something like a modern fly, is properly secured. There is nothing more embarrassing than an improperly fastened full front, a fact that colonial satirists found endlessly amusing. Stockings come next, and they are more important than you might think. Stockings cover the leg from toe to knee, where they are held up by garters, strips of fabric or ribbon tied just below the knee. The quality of your stockings, like everything else you wear, advertises your social position. Silk stockings in white or fashionable colours mark you as a person of means. Wool stockings in practical dark colours suggest honest labour and modest circumstances. Hand-knitted stockings might be made at home by women in the family, while finer stockings are purchased from specialised shops or imported from England. The stockings must be smooth and wrinkle-free. Bunchy stockings are a social embarrassment, so you take a moment to adjust them carefully before moving on. For women, the layers continue to multiply. Over the stays comes the petticoat, not an undergarment in the modern sense, but a visible skirt that forms part of the outfit. You might wear multiple petticoats for warmth, or a single petticoat in summer, and the fabric and decoration of your petticoats matter because they are designed to be seen. The outer skirt, often called a gown or robe, is typically open in front to display the petticoat beneath, so the two garments must coordinate aesthetically. Pockets are not sewn into women's clothing. Instead, you wear separate pocket bags tied around your waist, accessed through slits in the side seams of your petticoat. Losing your pocket is a disaster, since it contains everything you need to carry throughout the day. The outer layer for both men and women is some form of coat or jacket. For men, this means the long, fitted coat that defines 18th century masculine fashion. Knee-length, with wide skirts that flare out from the waist, large cuffs that can be turned back to display decorative lining, and a row of buttons down the front that are often left unfastened to show off the waistcoat. The coat is a significant investment, and a man might own only one or two good coats in his entire wardrobe, wearing them for years until they are too worn or too unfashionable to continue. For women, the outer layer varies more widely. A fitted bodice, a loose jacket called a bedgown for informal wear, or a more structured gown for formal occasions. Shoes are a consideration unto themselves. Leather shoes with buckles are standard for those who can afford them, and the size and decoration of your shoe buckles are yet another marker of wealth and status. Working people often wear simpler shoes or wooden clogs, especially in muddy conditions, and some of the poorest go barefoot in warm weather. Shoes are made by hand, fitted to the individual foot by a cobbler, and they are expected to last for years with regular repair and resoling. There is no left shoe and right shoe in this era. Shoes are made straight, and they gradually conform to the shape of whichever foot wears them through use. And then there is hair. If you're a man of fashion, you might wear a wig, those elaborate powdered constructions that we associate with the 18th century. Wigs are made from human hair, horse hair, or goat hair, styled into various configurations depending on current fashion, and maintained with pomade and powder that give them their distinctive white or greyish appearance. A good wig is expensive, requires regular maintenance by a wig maker, and is hot, itchy, and generally uncomfortable. Many men, especially those of working or middle class, skip the wig entirely and simply tie their natural hair back in a queue, secured with a ribbon. Shaving your head to accommodate a wig is common among the wealthy, which means that wig wearers often have pale, stubbled scalps that they keep carefully hidden. Women do not typically wear wigs in the same way, but their hairstyles are no less elaborate. Hair is pinned, curled, padded, and powdered into towering constructions that can take hours to create and are designed to last for days or even weeks between restylings. This means sleeping carefully, often on special pillows designed to protect the hairstyle, and tolerating the vermin that inevitably take up residence in all that powdered, permitted hair. Historians still argue whether the famous stories of mice nesting in women's hair are exaggerated, or based in uncomfortable fact, but the basic premise, that elaborate hairstyles were rarely washed or taken down, is definitely true. Finally, accessories. Hats are essential for both sexes whenever leaving the house. A three-cornered cocked hat for men, various caps and bonnets for women. Gloves, handkerchiefs, fans, walking sticks, and jewellery all play their part depending on occasion and social station. By the time you're fully dressed and ready to face the world, you're wearing at least 6 distinct layers of clothing plus shoes, hat, and accessories. You're also probably sweating, even in cool weather, because all those layers trap body heat in ways that modern single-layer dressing does not. You take one last look in that expensive mirror, adjust your hat, and prepare to face the colonial streets. The whole process has taken nearly 45 minutes, and you will have to do it all again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day until you die or fashion changes or you become rich enough to have servants dress you. For now, though, you look respectable, and in a society where appearance is everything, that is no small achievement. You make your way to the main room of the house where the morning meal is being prepared, and your stomach growls in anticipation, or possibly in dread, depending on your modern sensibilities. Breakfast in colonial New York is not the elaborate production it becomes in later centuries, with its pancakes and eggs and fresh fruit and endless options. It is a simple, practical affair, designed to provide fuel for the long workday ahead without wasting too much time or resources on preparation. The goal is calories, not cuisine, and expectations are adjusted accordingly. The main room serves multiple purposes. It is kitchen, dining room, and living space all in one, centered around the fireplace that provides both heat and cooking capacity. A fire burns constantly during waking hours, consuming alarming quantities of firewood that must be purchased or gathered, and the room is perpetually smoky despite the chimney's best efforts. The woman of the house, or a servant if the family is prosperous enough to employ one, tends a pot that hangs over the flames, stirring something that bubbles thickly and fills the air with a mild, grainy scent. This is porridge, the backbone of the colonial breakfast. It might be made from oats, corn, or wheat, depending on what is available and affordable, and it is cooked slowly, often overnight, in water or milk, until it reaches a thick, pudding-like consistency. The flavour is bland by modern standards. Colonial cooks are sparing with sugar and spices which are expensive, but you can dress it up with butter, molasses, or honey if you have access to such luxuries. You accept your wooden bowl of porridge with appropriate gratitude, add a drizzle of molasses from a small jug on the table, and begin to eat with a wooden spoon that has been used by countless mouths before yours. Bread accompanies the porridge, because bread accompanies everything in the colonial diet. This is not the soft, pre-sliced white bread of modern supermarkets. This is dense, heavy, coarse bread made from whatever flour was available at the bakery or milled at home. Wheat bread is preferred by those who can afford it. Wheat carries prestige, a holdover from English traditions, but rye, corn, and mixed grain breads are more common among ordinary people. The bread might be fresh, baked that morning in the communal oven, or purchased from a baker's shop, or it might be several days old and requiring a good dunk in your porridge or ale to soften it enough to chew. Stale bread is not wasted. It is simply reconstituted and eaten without complaint. Ah yes, ale. Here is a quirk of colonial breakfast that always surprises modern listeners. You might very well wash down your porridge and bread with beer, Not strong, intoxicating beer, though that exists and is popular, but small beer, a weak, lightly alcoholic beverage that serves as a staple drink for all ages. Small beer is made from the second or third running of the mash, after the stronger beer has been brewed, and it contains just enough alcohol to kill the bacteria and parasites that make water so dangerous. Children drink it, pregnant women drink it. Respectable people drink it at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, without any sense that they are doing something inappropriate. In a world where clean drinking water is genuinely hard to come by, small beer is simply a safer, more reliable alternative. Cider serves a similar function, especially in autumn when the apple harvest provides abundant raw material. Fresh cider ferments quickly into hard cider, and even the most devout colonial households keep barrels of it in the cellar. Tea is beginning to make inroads among the fashionable and the wealthy, imported from England at considerable expense, but it will not become the ubiquitous American beverage until later in the century, when it also becomes a political flashpoint. For now, most New Yorkers start their day with beer or cider and think nothing of it. If the household is prosperous, the breakfast table might include additional items. Cheese is common, hard, aged cheese that keeps well without refrigeration and provides protein and fat to sustain a working body. Eggs appear when the household chickens are laying well, though they are not the breakfast staple they will later become. Cold meat from last night's dinner might be served, especially in winter, when food preservation is easier. Butter, if you can afford it, makes everything taste better. Though colonial butter has a stronger, more pungent flavour than the mild cultured butter of modern production. Salt is present but used sparingly, because it must be imported and is surprisingly expensive. The family eats together, gathered around a single table or perched on benches and stools wherever space allows. There is no leisurely reading of the morning newspaper. Newspapers exist, but they are weekly publications aimed at the literate minority, not daily reading material for the masses. Instead, conversation fills the meal, though conversation might be too generous a term for the combination of household logistics, neighbourhood gossip, and parental instructions that passes between bites. Who needs to do what today? What the neighbour said about the minister's sermon. Why the youngest child must absolutely finish her porridge even if she does not want to. The eternal rhythms of domestic life. Historians still argue whether colonial breakfasts were nutritionally adequate by modern standards. On one hand, the diet is heavy on carbohydrates and light on variety. Vitamin C in particular can be hard to come by outside of the growing season, and many colonists suffer from seasonal deficiencies. On the other hand, the food is unprocessed, locally produced, and free of the refined sugars and artificial ingredients that plague modern diets. People who survive childhood tend to be reasonably healthy, if not necessarily long-lived. The real nutritional challenges come in winter when fresh food is scarce, and in years when harvests fail and prices rise beyond what ordinary families can afford. You finish your porridge, wipe your bowl with the last piece of bread to capture every remaining smear of molasses, and push back from the table. Breakfast has taken perhaps 20 minutes, an efficient fueling stop rather than a luxurious social ritual. The day's work is waiting, and lingering over meals is a privilege reserved for the wealthy and the leisured. You drain the last of your small beer, wipe your mouth with the back of your hand, napkins are for special occasions, and prepare to face whatever labours await you. Before you leave, you might grab something portable for later, a piece of cheese wrapped in cloth, an apple from the barrel in the corner, a chunk of bread to gnaw on if the morning stretch is long. Snacking between meals is common, necessary even, given the physical demands of colonial work. There is no shame in eating whenever you are hungry, as long as you have food to eat. The next formal meal will not come until midday, when you will pause your labours long enough to consume something more substantial. You step toward the door, your stomach pleasantly full, your body fortified for the work ahead. The taste of molasses lingers on your tongue, and you find yourself oddly grateful for this simple meal, this moment of warmth and relative comfort before the chaos of the streets reclaims you. Breakfast may not be exciting, but it is reliable, predictable, a small ritual of normalcy in a world that offers few guarantees. You will do this again tomorrow and the day after, eating your porridge and drinking your small beer and listening to the household chatter, and there is something almost comforting in that repetition. But now the morning is advancing, the light is strengthening, and the city is calling. You have places to be and people to see and money to earn, assuming you are fortunate enough to have employment. You adjust your hat, check that your pockets are secure, and step out into the noise and bustle of colonial New York, ready to face whatever the day might bring. The streets are waiting, and they do not wait patiently. You have barely taken 3 steps down the street when you hear a language that is definitely not English, and then another that is equally unfamiliar, and then a third that you cannot even begin to identify. Welcome to the linguistic chaos of colonial New York, one of the most diverse cities in the entire British colonial world. A place where a dozen different languages compete for space on every corner, and where the very concept of a common tongue is constantly being negotiated, contested and redefined. The Dutch were here first, of course, or rather first among the Europeans, since the Lenape people had been living on this island for thousands of years before any ships arrived, and their linguistic legacy persists long after the English takeover. Walk through certain neighbourhoods and you hear Dutch spoken in homes, in shops, in churches that still conduct services in the old language. The Dutch Reformed Church remains a powerful institution, and its congregants cling to their ancestral tongue with a stubbornness that frustrates English authorities. Dutch family names dominate the merchant class: Van Cortlandt, Stuyvesant, Van Rensselaer, Schuyler. Dutch legal terms persist in property records and court documents. Dutch curses somehow seem to carry more weight than their English equivalents, and even English speakers borrow them for emphasis. But Dutch is just the beginning. English is the official language of government and commerce, imposed by the conquering power and increasingly dominant in public life. Yet the English spoken here is not uniform. It carries the regional accents of the colonists who brought it, from the broad vowels of Yorkshire to the clipped consonants of London to the distinctive rhythms of the Anglo-Irish. A merchant from Bristol sounds nothing like a sailor from Liverpool, who sounds nothing like a minister educated at Oxford. You learn to navigate these variations, to decode the accents, to understand that English is itself a category containing multitudes. German speakers have been arriving in growing numbers throughout the early 18th century, fleeing religious persecution and economic hardship in the Rhineland and other regions. They cluster in certain neighbourhoods, establish their own churches, and maintain their own linguistic traditions even as they slowly integrate into the broader society. You hear German in the markets, in the workshops where German craftsmen practice their trades, in the beer halls that cater to immigrant communities. Some German speakers learn English quickly. Others spend their entire lives in New York without ever becoming fluent, relying on bilingual neighbours and children to translate when necessary. French is present too, though in smaller numbers. The Huguenots, French Protestants who fled Catholic persecution following the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1685, have established a significant community in New York, and their influence extends far beyond their numbers. French Huguenot families become prominent in trade, in finance, in the colonial elite, and their names, Delancey, Boudinot, Jay, will echo through American history for centuries. French carries prestige even among non-French speakers, associated with fashion, sophistication, and continental refinement. A gentleman might learn a bit of French to demonstrate his education, even if he never travels further than Philadelphia. And then there are the African languages, though they are rarely acknowledged in official records or polite conversation. Enslaved Africans, who make up a significant portion of the city's population, bring with them a diverse array of linguistic traditions from West and Central Africa: Akan, Igbo, Yoruba, Fon, Congo, and countless others. These languages survive in the slave quarters, in the markets where enslaved people gather, in the spiritual practices that blend African traditions with Christianity. Over time, elements of African languages filter into the broader linguistic landscape, influencing vocabulary, rhythm, and expression in ways that are often unrecognised but always present. Historians still argue about the extent to which a distinct African American dialect was already emerging in the colonial period, but the basic fact of African linguistic influence is undeniable. Native American languages too hover at the edges of colonial awareness. The Lenape people, though displaced from Manhattan itself, still live in the region, and trade and diplomacy require at least some colonists to learn their tongue. Interpreters are valuable, highly paid specialists who navigate between worlds. Lenape words for local geography, Mannahatta, Canarsie, Hackensack, persist even as the English impose their own names on the landscape. You might not speak any Lenape yourself, but you hear it occasionally, in the market stalls where native traders sell furs and wampum, in the stories old-timers tell about the days before the English came. The result of all this linguistic diversity is a city where multilingualism is not exceptional but expected. Many New Yorkers speak 2 or 3 languages with varying degrees of fluency, switching between them depending on context and audience. A Dutch merchant might speak English with his customers, Dutch with his family, and French with his most fashionable clients. An enslaved African might communicate in an African language with fellow enslaved people, in English with white colonists, and in a distinctive Creole that blends elements of multiple traditions. Children grow up absorbing whatever languages they hear around them, becoming fluent in tongues their grandparents never imagined. This diversity creates both opportunities and tensions. On one hand, New York's polyglot character makes it an effective centre of trade, capable of doing business with merchants from across the Atlantic world. On the other hand, linguistic fragmentation can impede the development of a unified colonial identity. English authorities periodically attempt to impose linguistic uniformity, encouraging English instruction and discouraging the use of foreign languages in official contexts. These efforts meet with limited success. The Dutch, in particular, resist Anglicisation for generations, maintaining their own schools, churches and newspapers well into the 18th century. You turn a corner and nearly collide with 2 men having a heated argument in what sounds like Portuguese, or possibly Spanish, you cannot quite tell. Jewish merchants, perhaps, members of the small but significant Sephardic community that has been present in New York since the Dutch era. The first Jewish settlers arrived in 1654. Refugees from Portuguese Brazil and their descendants have carved out a niche in the colonial economy, despite facing legal restrictions and social discrimination. They worship at the Shearith Israel congregation, the first Jewish synagogue in North America, and they conduct business in a web of languages that spans the Atlantic world. You do not understand what these men are saying, but you grasp the general tone. This is a dispute about money, probably, or business terms, or the reliability of a mutual acquaintance. Such disputes play out in every language, in every community, driven by the universal human concerns that transcend linguistic boundaries. Eventually one man throws up his hands in apparent exasperation, and both walk away in opposite directions, the argument unresolved but at least paused. You continue on your way, stepping around a woman selling vegetables who calls out her prices in heavily accented English, adding a few Dutch words for good measure. The street sounds like a symphony of human voices, each playing its own melody in its own key, somehow combining into something that sounds less like chaos and more like vitality. This is what makes New York different from Boston, from Philadelphia, from the more homogeneous communities of New England and the South. This is a city built by immigrants, sustained by trade, defined by the constant collision and combination of cultures. It is confusing, disorienting, occasionally frustrating, but it is also alive in a way that quieter, more uniform places can never be. You take a breath, let the bubble wash over you, and keep walking. The sun is fully up now, and the city has shifted into its working rhythm, that relentless grind of labour that defines colonial existence from first light until darkness makes further work impossible. You're heading toward your place of employment, perhaps a workshop, a warehouse, a merchant's office, or simply the docks where muscle and sweat are always in demand. Work in colonial New York is not something you do for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, with weekends off and paid vacation. It is something you do constantly, exhaustingly, from the moment you're old enough to contribute until the moment your body gives out or death intervenes. The nature of your work depends entirely on your place in the social hierarchy, and that place is largely determined by birth, gender, and circumstances beyond your control. If you are fortunate, born into a family of means, male, white, and healthy, you might be a merchant, a professional, or a master craftsman, directing the labour of others while keeping your own hands relatively clean. If you are less fortunate, female, poor, disabled, or simply unlucky, you work with your body, trading physical effort for whatever wages you can command. And if you are enslaved, as nearly 1 in 5 New Yorkers is during this period, you work according to the demands of your owner, without pay, without freedom, without any guarantee that your labour will ever benefit you or your family. Let us imagine, for the sake of this journey, that you are a young person of modest means, learning a trade through the apprenticeship system that structures most skilled labour in the colonial economy. Apprenticeship is the path to respectability for those who are not born wealthy, but have the health and connections to secure a placement. Your parents, or perhaps a charitable organisation, if you are orphaned, have arranged for you to live and work with a master craftsman for a period of several years, typically 7, during which you will learn the trade, earn no wages, and submit to the authority of your master in virtually all things. You arrive at the workshop where your master practices his craft, and the day's work is already underway. Perhaps he's a blacksmith, shaping iron over a blazing forge, the heat so intense that you can feel it from across the room. Perhaps he's a carpenter, surrounded by the sweet smell of sawdust and the rhythmic sound of planes and chisels. Perhaps he's a printer, operating one of the hand-powered presses that produce newspapers, pamphlets and books for the colonial market. Whatever the trade, the basic structure is the same. A master who has achieved the highest level of skill and status, one or more journeymen who work for wages but have not yet established their own shops, and apprentices like yourself who occupy the bottom rung of the ladder. Your duties are menial, at least at first. You sweep the floors, fetch supplies, run errands, tend the fire, and perform whatever tedious tasks the master and journeymen do not want to handle themselves. You wake before dawn to prepare the workspace and stay late to clean up after the day's work is done. You're fed and housed by your master, but the food is often poor, and the housing might be a corner of the workshop itself, a straw pallet behind the forge or beside the workbench. Privacy and comfort are luxuries that apprentices do not enjoy. But in exchange for this labour, you are learning. Slowly, grudgingly, the master teaches you the skills of the trade. How to hold a hammer, how to read a measuring stick, how to judge the quality of materials, how to interact with customers without embarrassing yourself or the shop. The teaching is often harsh, delivered through criticism rather than encouragement, through cuffs and curses when you make mistakes. Historians still argue whether the typical master-apprentice relationship was more exploitative or more educational, but the reality probably varied enormously depending on the personalities involved. The hours are brutal by modern standards. Work begins at or before dawn and continues until the light fails, which means 12 to 14 hours in summer and somewhat fewer in winter. There is a break for the midday meal and perhaps a few other brief pauses. But the expectation is constant productivity. Idleness is not tolerated. Wasted time is money lost. You learn to work quickly, efficiently, without complaint, because complaints only bring punishment and do nothing to shorten the day. Your body adapts to the demands, developing calluses where tools rub against skin, muscles where muscles are needed, a tolerance for fatigue that your modern self would find impossible. Not everyone works within the apprenticeship system, of course. Unskilled labourers, dock workers, domestic servants, general helpers of all kinds sell their strength by the day or the week, finding work wherever they can and enduring the uncertainty that comes with casual employment. Women work too, though their labour is often less visible and less valued. Cooking, cleaning, sewing, spinning, caring for children, tending gardens, selling goods in the market. Some women operate businesses in their own right. Widows often take over their husbands' shops, and certain trades like midwifery and mantua making are predominantly female, but most women's work takes place within the household, unpaid and unrecorded. The docks are the city's largest employer, a sprawling complex of wharves and warehouses that requires an army of workers to keep goods moving. Ships must be loaded and unloaded, cargo must be inspected and inventoried, repairs must be made, provisions must be secured. Dock work is backbreaking, dangerous and poorly paid, attracting the desperate and the strong in roughly equal measure. You might find yourself hauling barrels of sugar or tobacco, each weighing hundreds of pounds, up steep gangways and down into dark holds, while foremen shout instructions and dockmasters calculate tonnage. A single misstep can mean injury or death, crushed beneath falling cargo or drowned in the murky waters between ship and shore. Even children work in colonial New York. The concept of childhood as a protected period of play and education is largely a modern invention. In the 18th century, children are expected to contribute to the household economy as soon as they are physically capable. Young children help with domestic chores, tend animals, run errands, and mind their younger siblings. Older children are apprenticed out or hired as servants, beginning their adult working lives at ages that would horrify modern sensibilities. A 7-year-old might be sent to live with a master craftsman, separated from family and subjected to adult expectations, simply because that is how the economy functions. The day stretches ahead of you, hour after hour of labour, broken only by the midday meal and the occasional brief rest. Your hands are already sore, your back already aching, and the sun has barely climbed halfway to noon. But there is nothing to do except continue, to push through the fatigue and the discomfort, to earn your keep in a world that offers no alternative. You lift your tools, return to your task, and lose yourself in the rhythm of the work. The waterfront calls to you, as it calls to everyone in colonial New York, because the waterfront is where the money is. You make your way down toward the East River, following the gentle slope of the land and the increasingly pungent smell of fish, tar and brine. The streets grow more crowded as you approach, clogged with carts hauling goods to and from the docks, with sailors on leave spending their wages, with merchants and factors hurrying to inspect arriving shipments. The entire southern tip of Manhattan is oriented toward the water, and the wharves that line the shore are the beating heart of the colonial economy. You emerge onto the waterfront and pause for a moment to take it all in. The harbour is forest of masts. Dozens of ships anchored in the East River or tied up at the docks. They're rigging a tangle of ropes against the grey sky. Smaller boats dart between the larger vessels, lighters and sloops and rowboats carrying cargo and passengers across the water. On the Brooklyn shore you can see farmland stretching away into the distance, a reminder that this bustling port sits at the edge of a vast, largely untamed continent. Seagulls wheel overhead, screaming their complaints, and the constant slap of water against wooden hulls provides a rhythmic undertone to the chaos. The ships themselves are remarkable objects, monuments to the technology and ambition of the age. The largest are three-masted merchant vessels capable of crossing the Atlantic, carrying hundreds of tons of cargo in their deep holds. They arrive from London and Bristol and Liverpool, from Amsterdam and Hamburg, from the Caribbean and the African coast, bringing manufactured goods, enslaved people, sugar, molasses, rum, and countless other commodities that the colonies cannot produce for themselves. They depart laden with colonial exports, furs from the interior, timber from the forests, flour from the mills, and the agricultural products of a continent that seems inexhaustibly fertile. But the port trade involves much more than transatlantic voyages. Coastal shipping connects New York to the other colonies, carrying goods north to Boston and south to Philadelphia and Charleston. River traffic extends the city's commercial reach into the interior, up the Hudson toward Albany, and the fur trading posts beyond. Local fishing boats supply the daily markets with oysters, clams, cod, and whatever else the nets bring in. Every vessel, from the largest merchantman to the smallest rowboat, is part of an interconnected network of trade that makes New York one of the wealthiest ports in British North America. And then there are the slave ships. You watch one now, anchored a little distance from shore, and you know what it is even before anyone tells you. The vessel has a distinctive configuration, lower in the water than a typical cargo ship, with extra hatches for ventilation, and a haunted, heavy quality that seems to cling to its very timbers. Ships like this have been arriving in New York for decades, carrying human cargo from the west coast of Africa to be sold in the markets of the New World. The people aboard that ship, if they are still alive after the horrific Middle Passage, will be offloaded, inspected and auctioned like livestock, their lives and labour purchased by the highest bidder. New York is not the largest slave market in the colonies. That distinction belongs to Charleston and the ports of the Caribbean, but the slave trade is nonetheless central to the city's economy. Enslaved Africans provide much of the labour that keeps the port functioning, loading and unloading ships, hauling cargo, working in the warehouses and workshops that process imported goods. They cook in the taverns, serve in the wealthy households, tend the gardens and livestock that sustain the city. They are everywhere, these enslaved men and women and children, integral to every aspect of colonial life, yet largely invisible in the official records and polite conversations that document the era. You turn away from the slave ship and focus on the legitimate commerce taking place around you. A merchant is arguing with a ship's captain about damaged cargo, their voices rising in angry accusation and defensive explanation. Dock workers are wrestling a heavy crate down a gangway, their muscles straining, their feet sliding on boards slick with spray. A woman is selling oysters from a wooden tray balanced on her head, calling out her prices in a voice that cuts through the general din. A boy, perhaps 10 years old, darts between the adults, running some errand for a master who tolerates no delays. The smell is overwhelming, even by colonial standards. Fish, obviously. Fresh fish, rotting fish, fish being salted and packed for shipment to distant markets. Tar and pitch, used to seal the hulls and waterproof the ropes that keep the ship seaworthy. Tobacco and molasses, their distinctive scents drifting from open casks. Human sweat, concentrated in the crowded spaces where labourers toil hour after hour. And underneath it all, the fundamental smell of the harbour itself, a combination of salt water, organic decay, and industrial activity that defines every waterfront in every port city on Earth. The commerce taking place here follows patterns that will shape the Atlantic economy for centuries. Raw materials flow out of the colonies, furs, timber, grain, and the products of extractive industries, while manufactured goods flow in from England and Europe. This is the mercantilist system in action, designed to benefit the mother country by keeping the colonies dependent on imported manufactures. Colonial merchants chafe at the restrictions, smuggling goods when they can, evading duties when they dare, but the basic structure remains intact. New York gets rich, but England gets richer. Historians still argue about whether New York's 18th century prosperity was built primarily on legitimate trade or on the less savoury commerce of slavery and smuggling. The truth is probably that all three were intertwined, each supporting and enabling the others in a web of economic activity that defies simple moral categorization. The same merchant who imports fine textiles from London might also invest in slave voyages, or look the other way when contraband passes through his warehouse. The same ship that carries legal cargo might make room for a few barrels of smuggled molasses. The line between legitimate and illegitimate commerce is blurry, constantly shifting, defined more by enforcement priorities than by clear legal distinctions. You linger at the waterfront for a few more minutes, watching the endless activity before the demands of your own labour pull you away. The ships will still be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, each one a thread in the vast web of trade that connects this small colonial port to the wider world. You carry with you the smell of the sea and the image of those swaying masts, reminders that New York is not a self-contained world, but a node in a global network, its fortunes tied to currents, economic, political, human, that originate thousands of miles away. You cannot walk more than a few blocks in colonial New York without confronting the reality of slavery, that brutal institution that underlies so much of the city's prosperity and shapes so much of its daily life. You might prefer to look away, to focus on the quaint architecture and colourful market stalls and other picturesque details of colonial existence. But looking away is itself a kind of historical dishonesty, and we are here to understand life as it was actually lived, not as we might wish it had been. The numbers are stark. In the early decades of the 18th century, enslaved Africans constitute roughly 15 to 20% of New York's population, one of the highest percentages of any city north of the Mason-Dixon line. By some estimates, nearly half of all white households in Manhattan own at least one enslaved person. These are not distant plantation slaves, labouring in fields miles from any urban centre. These are people who live in the same houses as their enslavers, who cook the food, tend the children, wash the clothes, and perform the countless tasks that make daily life possible. Their presence is everywhere, integral and inescapable. The experience of enslavement in New York differs in certain ways from the plantation slavery of the South, though whether those differences make it better or worse is a matter of perspective. Urban slaves often have more freedom of movement than their rural counterparts, able to travel through the city on errands, to hire out their labour to other employers, to participate in a limited economy of their own. Some enslaved people manage to accumulate small amounts of money, to learn marketable skills, to negotiate minor concessions from their enslavers. A few even purchase their own freedom, though this requires years of labour and considerable luck. But the fundamental violence of the institution remains constant. Enslaved people in New York can be bought and sold like property, separated from families without warning or recourse. They can be beaten, raped, and murdered with little fear of legal consequence for their enslavers. They are subject to curfews, pass systems, and other restrictions that monitor and control their movements. They are forbidden from gathering in groups, from owning weapons, from doing countless ordinary things that free people take for granted. The psychological toll of this constant surveillance and control is impossible to fully measure, but its effects ripple through generations. The legal status of enslaved people in New York is defined by a series of colonial laws that grow harsher over time. The Slave Code of 1702 establishes the basic framework. Enslaved people are property, not persons, and their testimony cannot be used against white people in court. They cannot meet in groups of more than 3 without white supervision. They cannot buy or sell goods without their enslaver's permission. Punishment for various offences ranges from whipping to branding to death. These laws are expanded and intensified after the slave revolt of 1712, when enslaved people rose up against their enslavers, killing 9 whites and wounding others before being captured and executed with horrifying brutality. You might witness an enslaved person at work as you walk through the city, a young woman carrying water from the public well, a man loading cargo at the docks, a child minding a white family's children in the park. Their faces reveal little to the casual observer. The survival strategies of the enslaved often involve masking emotions, appearing content and compliant to avoid punishment. But beneath that mask lies a rich interior world of resistance, community, and hope. Enslaved people create their own social networks, maintain their own spiritual practices, preserve what they can of African traditions and languages. They resist in ways large and small, from outright rebellion to work slowdowns to the simple act of maintaining their humanity in a system designed to deny it. The markets are where enslaved people often have the most visible presence, buying and selling goods on behalf of their enslavers or on their own account. The Catherine Market, in particular, becomes a gathering place for enslaved and free black New Yorkers, a space where African cultural practices can be performed and preserved despite the restrictions of colonial law. Here you might witness dances, songs, and musical traditions that trace their roots back to West Africa, preserved and adapted across the trauma of the Middle Passage. Historians still argue about the degree to which distinctly African American cultural forms were already emerging in the colonial period, but the evidence from markets like Catherine suggests that the process was well underway. The 1741 conspiracy, also known as the New York Conspiracy or the Great Negro Plot, casts a long shadow over the mid-century decades. In that year, a series of fires broke out across the city, and rumour quickly blamed enslaved people and their alleged white accomplices for plotting to burn New York to the ground and massacre its white inhabitants. The ensuing panic led to mass arrests, coerced confessions, and a wave of executions that left 17 black men hanged, 13 black men burned at the stake, and 4 white people hanged as conspirators. Historians still argue whether the conspiracy was real, a genuine uprising planned by enslaved people, pushed beyond endurance, or a fabrication born of racial hysteria and prosecutorial overreach. The truth may never be known, but the terror that followed was all too real. You pass a notice posted on a wooden board near the market, and you stop to read it despite yourself. It is an advertisement for a slave auction, listing the merchandise available for purchase, men and women, described by age, health, skills, and temperament. A likely Negro wench, about 20 years of age, good for domestic service. A strong Negro man, skilled in coopering, no vices. The language is clinical, businesslike, utterly devoid of the moral horror that modern readers cannot help but feel. These are human beings reduced to inventory, their lives and futures determined by the highest bidder. You look away from the notice and continue walking, your stomach churning with something that feels like shame. You did not create this system. You cannot change it from within this historical imagination. But you can bear witness, can remember that the prosperity of colonial New York was built on a foundation of human suffering, can refuse to romanticize an era that included such profound injustice. The enslaved people of 1700s New York left few records in their own voices, but their presence haunts every street, every building, every comfortable myth about the colonial past. We owe them, at minimum, the acknowledgement of their suffering and the recognition of their humanity. The smell hits you first, as it always does, that rich, complicated fragrance of raw commerce that announces the market before you can see it. Fish, obviously, the sharp oceanic tang of creatures hauled from the harbour that morning. Vegetables, some fresh and dewy, others wilting in the sun that is beginning to warm the day. Meat, hanging from hooks in various stages of freshness, drawing flies that the vendors wave away with increasing futility. Spices, imported from distant lands, their exotic scents drifting from apothecary stalls, and underneath it all the baseline odour of humanity packed into a small space, sweating, shouting, bargaining, living. You push your way into the crowded market square, and immediately you are swept up in the chaos. This is where colonial New Yorkers come to buy the necessities of daily life, and the scene is overwhelming to modern sensibilities accustomed to orderly supermarket aisles and sanitised packaging. There are no price tags here, no standardised weights and measures that you can trust, no consumer protection laws to prevent fraud. Every transaction is a negotiation, a battle of wits between buyer and seller, and the inexperienced or unwary can easily be cheated. The fish vendors occupy one section of the market, their catches displayed on wooden tables or hanging from racks. Oysters are cheap and plentiful, so abundant in fact that they are considered food for the poor, sold by the bucket to whoever has a few pennies to spare. Wealthy diners will eventually make oysters fashionable, but for now they are a staple of the working class diet, eaten raw or roasted or incorporated into stews. Other shellfish are equally common: clams, mussels, crabs hauled from the harbour's murky waters. Fresh fish of various species round out the selection, their scales glittering in the morning light, their eyes still bright enough to suggest recent death. The meat section is more disturbing to modern eyes. Animals are slaughtered on site or nearby, and the blood and offal are disposed of with minimal ceremony. You might see a butcher hacking apart a pig carcass, or a chicken vendor wringing necks as customers watch. The concept of refrigeration does not exist, so meat must be purchased and consumed quickly, especially in warm weather. Salted, smoked and dried meats are available for those who need longer preservation, but fresh meat remains the preference for anyone who can afford it. The quality varies enormously, and experienced shoppers know how to spot the signs of spoilage, the off-colours and questionable smells that indicate danger. Vegetables come from gardens within the city and farms in the surrounding countryside, brought to market by farmers or their hired hands. The selection is seasonal, abundant variety in summer and fall, scarcity in winter and spring, and nothing is available year-round in the way modern consumers expect. Root vegetables like carrots, turnips and potatoes keep well in cellars and form the backbone of the winter diet. Leafy greens appear in warmer months and must be consumed quickly before they wilt. Onions, garlic and cabbage are staples, versatile and sturdy enough to withstand the rigours of colonial food distribution. Bread vendors offer their wares from baskets and carts, the loaves still warm from morning baking. Bakers are among the most regulated tradespeople in colonial New York, subject to laws that specify the weight, quality and price of their products. The assize of bread, as this regulation is called, is intended to prevent profiteering and ensure that even the poorest citizens can afford basic sustenance. Violations are punished with fines, and repeat offenders can lose their licenses. Despite these regulations, the quality of bread varies considerably, and savvy shoppers learn which bakers can be trusted and which cut corners with inferior flour or short weights. The market is also where you buy the countless other goods that sustain daily life. Candles, essential for any activity after dark, are sold by chandlers who make them from tallow or more expensive beeswax. Soap, harsh and strongly scented, comes in bars or balls. Cloth and thread and needles for the endless work of making and mending clothes, pottery and metalware for the kitchen. Leather goods, from shoes to harnesses to bags. Tobacco, already widely popular, sold in various preparations for smoking, chewing or snuff. The variety is remarkable for a city of this size, a testament to the trade networks that connect New York to the wider world. Bargaining is an art form here, and you watch the practiced haggling with admiration. A woman holds up a fish, sniffs it critically, declares it inferior, offers half the asking price. The vendor protests, insists on his goods' quality, threatens to sell to someone less unreasonable. They go back and forth, voices rising and falling, hands gesturing, until eventually a compromise is reached and coins change hands. This ritual repeats at every stall, a daily performance of economic theatre that determines who eats well and who goes hungry. Not everyone pays with money. Barter is common, especially among those with goods or services to trade, but limited access to currency. A farmer might exchange vegetables for a craftsman's products. A domestic servant might trade labour for market goods. Credit, too, plays a role, with vendors keeping informal accounts for trusted customers who pay weekly or monthly rather than with each purchase. The economy is more flexible, more personal than modern commercial transactions, built on relationships and reputation rather than anonymous exchange. Historians still argue about whether colonial markets were more or less efficient than modern alternatives, but efficiency was probably not the point. The market was a social institution as much as an economic one, a place where people gathered, gossiped, and maintained the human connections that held communities together. You came here to buy fish, but you also came to see your neighbours, to hear the latest news, to participate in the collective life of the city. That function persisted even as the goods on offer changed and the means of exchange evolved. You complete your purchases such as they are and prepare to leave the market chaos behind. Your basket is heavier now, laden with whatever provisions you could afford, and you feel a small satisfaction in having navigated the commercial gauntlet successfully. Tonight's dinner is secured, assuming nothing spoils before you get home. You dodge a cart, sidestep a puddle of something unidentifiable, and make your way back toward the street, leaving the noise and smell to fade slowly behind you. Your stomach is growling, the morning's porridge a distant memory, and the midday meal calls with an urgency that cannot be ignored. You push through the crowded streets toward a familiar establishment, a tavern, or ordinary, where working people like yourself can find food and drink at prices that will not bankrupt you. The concept of the restaurant as modern diners understand it does not yet exist. There are no menus to peruse, no elegant dining rooms with tablecloths and candles. Instead, there are taverns, rough, boisterous, democratic institutions where high and low mingle over ale and whatever the kitchen has prepared that day. You duck through a low doorway and enter a dimly lit room that smells of wood smoke, stale beer, and cooking meat. The tavern is already crowded despite the early hour, filled with labourers taking their midday break, merchants conducting business over drinks, sailors spending their shore leave with enthusiastic dedication. The noise level is substantial. Conversation shouted over the general din, the clatter of tankards on wooden tables, occasional bursts of laughter or argument that rise above the baseline chaos. This is not a place for quiet contemplation. This is a place for consumption and conversation in roughly equal measure. You find a spot at a long communal table, squeezing in between two strangers who barely acknowledge your presence, and you signal to the serving woman who weaves between the tables with practiced efficiency. She's tired, clearly, her hair escaping from beneath a dirty cap, her apron stained with evidence of a long morning's work, but she manages a professional smile as she takes your order. The options are limited. Whatever the kitchen has prepared is what you will eat, and today that appears to be a stew of indeterminate composition, bread, cheese, and the inevitable ale. The food arrives quickly, because there is no complex preparation required. The stew has been simmering since dawn, and the bread was baked this morning by someone else. You eat with the same wooden spoon that countless others have used, from a bowl that has been wiped rather than washed between customers. The stew is hearty rather than delicious, thick with vegetables and bits of meat that might be beef or might be pork or might be something else entirely. You do not ask too many questions, you simply eat, grateful for the calories and the brief respite from labour. Ale flows freely in the Colonial Tavern, as it flows freely throughout colonial life. This is small beer, weak enough that you can drink several tankards without serious impairment, or it might be stronger stuff depending on your preference and budget. Cider is available too, and rum, that Caribbean import that is becoming increasingly popular throughout the colonies. Drunkenness is common, tolerated within limits, punished only when it leads to disorder or violence. The colonial attitude toward alcohol is vastly more permissive than later temperance movements will impose. Drinking is simply part of daily life, no more remarkable than eating or breathing. The tavern is not just a place to eat and drink, it is a vital node in the colonial information network. Here you learn the news of the day, the gossip of the neighbourhood, the rumours that circulate through the population before they ever reach the pages of the weekly newspaper. A ship has arrived from London with interesting cargo. A prominent merchant has died, leaving debts that exceed his assets. The governor is considering some new policy that will affect trade. A scandal is brewing in one of the churches. You absorb this information passively, listening to the conversations around you, piecing together a picture of the city's affairs that no official document could provide. Business is conducted in the tavern too. Merchants negotiate deals, craftsmen arrange contracts, labourers are hired and fired. The tavern serves as an informal office for those who lack a more formal space. a neutral ground where parties can meet and reach agreements lubricated by alcohol. Some taverns cater to specific trades or communities. A tavern frequented by sailors will have a different atmosphere than one popular with lawyers, but most welcome anyone with money to spend. The tavern keeper profits from the volume, charging for food and drink while the customers use his establishment for their own purposes. Political discussions are common, though perhaps more cautious than they will become later in the century as tensions with England mount. For now, most colonists consider themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown, proud participants in the greatest empire the world has ever seen. They grumble about taxes and regulations, as colonists always have, but outright rebellion remains unthinkable for most. Still, you might hear whispers of discontent, complaints about distant authorities who do not understand colonial conditions, predictions that one day the colonies will assert themselves more forcefully. Historians still argue about when revolutionary sentiment first began to spread, but taverns were certainly among the places where dangerous ideas circulated. The serving woman refills your tankard without being asked, adding the cost to the mental tally she maintains for each customer. You nod your thanks and take a long pull, the ale washing down the remnants of stew still clinging to your throat. The break is almost over. Soon you will have to return to whatever labour awaits you, and the brief leisure of the tavern will give way to the relentless demands of the working day. But for now, for these few minutes, you can sit and eat and listen and be a part of the human community that fills this smoky room. Someone at the next table is telling a joke, building toward a punchline with theatrical timing. You catch only fragments, something about a farmer, a merchant, and a pig. But when the punchline lands, the table erupts in laughter, and you find yourself smiling despite not quite understanding the humour. This is what taverns are for, really. Not just the food and drink, but the human connection, the shared moments of levity that make the hardship of colonial life slightly more bearable. You finish your ale, settle your bill with a few coins, and reluctantly push back from the table, ready to face the afternoon ahead. The church bells ring out across the city, their bronze voices cutting through the market noise and tavern chatter, calling the faithful to worship and reminding everyone else that religion shapes the rhythm of colonial life in ways that no modern secular mind can fully appreciate. You pause in the street, listening to the overlapping peals that announce midday prayer or some special observance, and you think about the role that faith plays in this society, not as a private matter of individual conscience, but as a public institution that touches every aspect of existence. The religious landscape of colonial New York is remarkably diverse for its time, the consequence of the city's complicated history and pragmatic commercial culture. The Dutch founded the colony under the auspices of the Dutch Reformed Church, a Calvinist tradition that emphasized predestination, strict moral codes, and the importance of education. Dutch Reformed congregations still dominate certain neighbourhoods, conducting services in Dutch, maintaining their own schools, and preserving traditions that connect them to the Old World. These congregations resist English cultural pressure with remarkable stubbornness, clinging to their ancestral faith as a marker of identity in a city that grows more English by the day. But the English takeover brought the Church of England, the established church of the mother country, and Anglican congregations now claim official status and government support. Trinity Church, founded in 1697, is the city's most prominent Anglican congregation, its spire a landmark visible from across the harbour. Attending Anglican services carries social and political advantages, marking you as a respectable member of the colonial establishment rather than a stubborn holdout clinging to foreign traditions. Many Dutch families convert or at least attend Anglican services in addition to Dutch Reformed ones, hedging their spiritual bets in a characteristically pragmatic way. The other Protestant denominations jostle for space in this crowded religious marketplace. Presbyterians, many of them Scottish or Scots-Irish in origin, maintain their own congregations and their own theological traditions. Lutherans, mostly German immigrants, worship in their own language and according to their own customs. Quakers, those radical egalitarians who refuse to swear oaths or remove their hats before social superiors, have a small but notable presence. French Huguenots, refugees from Catholic persecution, maintain congregations that gradually merge with the Anglican mainstream while preserving certain distinctive practices. The variety is remarkable for a city of this size, a testament to New York's tradition of religious tolerance, or at least religious coexistence. Jews worship openly in New York, one of the few places in the colonial world where they can do so. The Sheerith Israel congregation, founded in 1654 by Sephardic refugees from Portuguese Brazil, is the oldest Jewish congregation in North America. Its members face legal restrictions. They cannot vote or hold office in most circumstances, but they can practice their faith without fear of persecution, maintain their own communal institutions, and participate in the economic life of the city. The congregation's synagogue, though modest by later standards, is a significant presence in the neighbourhood, a reminder that religious diversity in colonial New York extends beyond the boundaries of Protestant Christianity. Catholics, by contrast, occupy a more precarious position. Anti-Catholic sentiment runs deep in British Protestant culture, fueled by centuries of conflict with Catholic powers and by the religious wars that devastated Europe in earlier generations. Catholics cannot worship publicly in New York. Any priest found conducting Mass could face arrest or worse. Irish Catholic immigrants, and there are some, despite the restrictions, practice their faith in secret, gathering in private homes for services conducted by itinerant priests who travel under assumed identities. The full flowering of American Catholicism lies in the future. After waves of 19th century immigration transformed the religious landscape entirely, church attendance is not merely a spiritual obligation, it is a social requirement enforced by law and custom. Colonial statutes require attendance at some form of Sunday worship, though enforcement varies by jurisdiction and era. More importantly, attendance marks you as a respectable member of the community, someone who can be trusted in business and social dealings. Your church is your social network, your mutual aid society, your community in the most fundamental sense. It is where you find a marriage partner, where you baptize your children, where you are mourned when you die. To be outside the church, any church, is to be outside civil society itself. The Sabbath shapes the week in ways that modern secular societies have largely forgotten. Sunday is a day of rest, not because people choose to rest, but because law and custom forbid most forms of work and commerce. Shops are closed, markets are shut, taverns are forbidden from serving during church hours. You spend the day attending services, long services, by modern standards, with sermons that can stretch for an hour or more, and engaging in appropriately pious activities, reading scripture, visiting the sick, contemplating your spiritual condition. The restrictions feel oppressive to modern sensibilities, but provide a genuine respite from the relentless labour that fills the other 6 days. Sermons are the primary form of public discourse in colonial America, more important than newspapers or political speeches as vehicles for communicating ideas. A skilled minister can shape the opinions of his congregation on matters far beyond the strictly theological, pronouncing on political questions, social issues, and moral controversies from the unassailable authority of the pulpit. Ministers are among the most educated men in colonial society, college graduates in an era when most people can barely read, and their intellectual influence extends far beyond their immediate congregations. Historians still argue about the role of religious rhetoric in preparing the colonial mind for revolution, but the pulpit was certainly one of the places where new ideas found their first expression. You resume your walk through the streets, the church bells fading behind you, and you think about the faith of your ancestors, or rather, the faith that would have been your ancestors if you had actually lived in this time and place. Religion here is not a consumer choice, not a matter of personal preference to be selected from a menu of options. It is the framework within which life is lived, the lens through which experience is interpreted, the community that sustains you from cradle to grave. You might believe devoutly, or you might go through the motions, but either way, religion shapes your world in ways that are inescapable. You see them everywhere, the children, and their presence strikes you as both familiar and deeply strange. Familiar because children are children in every era, running, shouting, playing when they can steal a moment, crying when they are hurt or hungry or tired. Strange because these children live lives so different from their modern counterparts. Lives shaped by danger, labour and mortality in ways that comfortable 21st century childhoods can barely imagine. You watch a group of them playing in an alley, their game interrupted by a mother's sharp call, and you think about what it means to be young in colonial New York. The first thing to understand is that childhood, as a distinct protected phase of life, barely exists in this era. The The concept of children as innocent beings who deserve special care, education and freedom from adult responsibilities is largely a modern invention. In the 1700s, children are essentially small adults, expected to contribute to the household economy as soon as they are physically capable, and to take on adult roles at ages that would horrify modern sensibilities. A 6-year-old might be responsible for tending younger siblings, feeding chickens, running errands, and performing simple household tasks. A 10-year-old might be apprenticed to a trade, sent to live with a master craftsman far from family and home. Infant mortality casts a shadow over every family, and you cannot understand colonial childhood without confronting this grim reality. Roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of all children born in colonial American cities die before reaching their 5th birthday. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, and the general hazards of pre-modern life claim young lives with brutal regularity. Parents expect to bury children. They do not like it, but they prepare themselves for the possibility with every pregnancy. Naming practices reflect this reality. It is common to give a newborn the name of a deceased older sibling. Recycling names in a way that seems morbid to modern ears, but made practical sense when death was so common. The children who survive infancy face dangers at every turn. Drowning is a leading cause of death, given the city's waterfront location and the absence of any concept of childproofing. Burns from cooking fires claim lives and leave survivors scarred. Animal attacks, traffic accidents, falls from heights. The colonial world is full of hazards that we have largely engineered out of modern childhood. Parents supervise when they can, but supervision is limited when adults have work to do, and children are expected to take care of themselves and each other. Education varies enormously by class, gender, and circumstance. Wealthy families hire tutors or send their children to private academies, where they learn Latin, Greek, mathematics, and the other subjects that mark a gentleman's education. Middling families might send children to dame schools, informal establishments run by women who teach basic reading and writing in exchange for small fees. Poor families often cannot afford any education at all, and their children grow up illiterate, destined for manual labour that requires strong backs rather than educated minds. Girls receive less education than boys at every social level, because female education is considered less important, and because girls are needed at home to help with domestic work. The children you see in the streets are working, most of them. The small girl carrying water from the public well is not playing, she is performing a necessary household task. The boy sweeping the steps of a shop is an apprentice or a servant, earning his keep through labour. The children minding younger siblings in the alley are taking on childcare responsibilities that would fall to professional daycare workers or stay-at-home parents in the modern world. Child labour is not a scandal to be exposed and eliminated. It is simply how the economy functions, how families survive, how skills are transmitted from one generation to the next. Play happens, of course. Children will find ways to play regardless of circumstances, but it happens in the margins, in stolen moments between chores and duties. The games are simpler than modern entertainment. Rolling hoops, playing with dolls made from rags and sticks, improvised ball games with whatever materials are available. Toys exist, but they are expensive, handcrafted luxuries available mainly to wealthy families. Most children entertain themselves with imagination and whatever objects they can find, turning sticks into swords and puddles into oceans and alleys into kingdoms to be conquered. The relationship between parents and children differs from modern expectations in ways that are difficult to fully grasp. Love exists, of course it exists, but it is expressed differently, filtered through theological assumptions about the sinful nature of children and the parental duty to discipline and correct. The famous Puritan advice to avoid spoiling children with too much affection finds echoes throughout colonial culture. Parenting manuals, yes, they existed, advise strict discipline, regular punishment, and constant vigilance against the natural depravity that supposedly characterizes all human beings from birth. Whether parents actually followed this advice, or loved their children with the same warmth that modern parents do despite the stern official guidance, is a question historians still argue about. Orphans are common, given the mortality rates of the era, and their fate varies depending on circumstances. Relatives might take them in, absorbing them into extended family networks that expand and contract with births and deaths. Charitable institutions exist to provide for children without family support. though these institutions can be harsh places where discipline takes precedence over comfort. Apprenticeship offers another option, placing orphaned children with masters who provide training and support in exchange for labour. The system is imperfect, often abused, but it provides at least a path forward for children who might otherwise fall into destitution. You watch the children in the alley disperse at their mother's call, scattering to whatever tasks await them, and you feel a complicated mix of emotions. Pity certainly for lives so constrained by circumstances beyond their control, admiration perhaps for the resilience that allows children to thrive even in difficult conditions, and a strange kind of gratitude for the changes that have made modern childhood, for all its problems, safer and more protected than anything these colonial children could have imagined. A cough echoes from a nearby doorway, a deep, rattling, liquid cough that speaks of something serious lurking in someone's lungs, and you instinctively pull your coat tighter and angle away from the sound. Disease is everywhere in colonial New York, an invisible enemy that strikes without warning and kills without mercy, and even the healthiest person learns to fear the symptoms that might herald their own demise. You cannot see the pathogens that circulate through the crowded streets, but you can see their effects. The pale faces, the sweating brows, the bodies carried to burial grounds with distressing regularity. Smallpox is the great terror of the age, a disease so deadly and so disfiguring that its very name inspires dread. The virus spreads through the air from person to person, and it kills roughly 1/3 of those it infects. Survivors are often left scarred for life, their faces pitted with the distinctive pockmarks that advertise their brush with death. Smallpox epidemics sweep through colonial cities every few years, killing hundreds or thousands and leaving the survivors traumatized and marked. There is no cure, no effective treatment. You either survive or you do not, and the outcome depends largely on factors beyond anyone's control. Yet even smallpox offers a glimmer of hope, a possibility of protection that represents one of the era's most controversial medical innovations. Inoculation, the deliberate introduction of smallpox material into a healthy person's body to induce a mild case of the disease and subsequent immunity, is practiced by some physicians and desperately sought by some families. The procedure is dangerous. A small percentage of inoculated patients develop full-blown smallpox and die. It is also controversial. Many religious authorities condemn it as interference with God's will, and many ordinary people fear it as unnatural and reckless. Historians still argue about the extent of inoculation's adoption in colonial America, but the debate it sparked foreshadowed the vaccination controversies that would emerge in later centuries. Yellow fever arrives periodically from the Caribbean, carried by ships and the mosquitoes that breed in the stagnant water that accumulates throughout the city. The disease strikes quickly: fever, headache, muscle pain, then the yellowing of the skin that gives it its name, and it kills quickly too, often within days of the first symptoms. Yellow fever epidemics can devastate colonial ports, killing hundreds and sending thousands fleeing to the countryside in search of safety. The cause is unknown. The mosquito vector will not be identified for another century and a half. All people know is that the disease comes in summer, seems connected to the waterfront, and kills with terrifying efficiency. The mysterious ailments that colonial physicians cannot identify or explain are perhaps even more frightening than the diseases with names. Fevers of uncertain origin sweep through households, killing some members and sparing others with no discernible pattern. Fluxes and bloody discharges empty the body of vital fluids. Fits and convulsions strike without warning. Consumption, what we now call tuberculosis, slowly wastes the body over months or years, leaving victims pale and thin and coughing blood until death finally releases them. The causes are unknown, the cures are non-existent, the fear is constant. Childhood diseases claim lives that modern medicine would save without difficulty. Measles, mumps, whooping cough, diphtheria. These are not minor inconveniences, but serious threats that kill children by the hundreds during epidemic years. A case of what we would now call strep throat can lead to scarlet fever, rheumatic heart disease, and death. An infected wound can turn gangrenous, requiring amputation if the patient is lucky and killing if not. The fragility of human life, the ease with which a healthy person can become a corpse, is impossible to ignore in colonial New York. The psychological burden of this disease environment is difficult for modern minds to fully appreciate. Every cough might be the beginning of the end. Every fever might be the start of an epidemic. Every child's illness might be their last. People develop coping mechanisms, religious faith that promises meaning in suffering and reunion after death, fatalistic acceptance of mortality as an inevitable part of existence, simple psychological denial that allows normal life to continue despite the constant threat. But the fear is always there, lurking beneath the surface, shaping behaviour and belief in ways that are impossible to fully measure. The poor suffer disproportionately as they always do. Crowded living conditions accelerate disease transmission. Malnutrition weakens immune systems and increases vulnerability. Limited access to whatever medical care exists, and we will discuss that care shortly, means that treatable conditions go untreated until they become fatal. The wealthy can flee to country estates when epidemics strike the city. The poor must stay and take their chances, praying that the disease passes them by. You hurry past the coughing figure in the doorway, offering a silent prayer, or perhaps just a fervent hope that whatever afflicts them will not spread to you. Your modern mind knows that most respiratory infections are not fatal, that the cough you heard probably came from someone with a cold or minor bronchitis who will recover in a few days. But you are trying to inhabit the colonial mindset, to feel as they felt, and that mindset includes a baseline terror of illness that modern antibiotics and vaccines have largely eliminated. Every symptom was potentially a death sentence, every epidemic a lottery that claimed lives apparently at random. Living with that knowledge, day after day, year after year, required a kind of courage that comfortable modern people rarely have to summon. The sign of the barber surgeon swings above a doorway, a striped pole that advertises bloodletting services as much as haircuts, and you shudder involuntarily as you think about what passes for medical care in colonial New York. If disease is terrifying, the treatments available are often equally so, based on theories of the body that will later be recognised as completely wrong and administered by practitioners whose training ranges from excellent to non-existent. You're better off, statistically speaking, avoiding doctors entirely unless your condition is immediately life-threatening. And even then, the odds are not necessarily in your favour. The medical theory that dominates this era is humorism, a framework inherited from ancient Greece and medieval Europe that explains health and illness in terms of 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to this theory, disease results from an imbalance of these humours, and treatment consists of restoring balance through various interventions. Too much blood, drain some off through bloodletting. Too much bile, purge it through vomiting or diarrhea. The logic is internally consistent, even elegant in its simplicity. It is also almost entirely wrong, and the treatments it inspires often make patients worse rather than better. Bloodletting is the most common medical intervention of the era, practiced on patients suffering from almost any complaint. The barber surgeon, that hybrid professional who cuts hair and drains blood with equal facility, is a fixture of colonial towns, his striped pole a symbol of the red and white bandages used in the procedure. Bloodletting might be accomplished through simple incision, allowing blood to flow into a bowl until the practitioner judges enough has been drained. Or it might involve leeches, those blood-sucking worms that attach to the skin and feed until they drop off, engorged and satisfied. George Washington, decades from now, will die, in part because his physicians drain him of nearly half his blood while trying to treat a throat infection. The president could not have known better. The treatment was standard care. Mercury is another staple of colonial medicine, prescribed for ailments ranging from syphilis to intestinal parasites to general malaise. The heavy metal is toxic, of course. It causes tremors, madness, tooth loss, and eventually death. But its dramatic effects on the body convince physicians and patients alike that something powerful is happening. Salivation, the excessive drooling that mercury poisoning induces, is considered a sign that the treatment is working, that the body is expelling its diseased humours through copious production of spit. Patients who survive mercury treatment often credit it with saving their lives, unaware that they have traded one poison for another. Purging and vomiting are prescribed with similar enthusiasm, the goal being to empty the body of corrupted substances through any available exit. Emetics induce vomiting, purgatives induce diarrhea. Together they leave patients weak, dehydrated, and often worse off than before treatment began. The physical misery of these interventions is considered evidence of their effectiveness. Surely something so unpleasant must be doing good. Historians still argue about whether colonial patients genuinely believed in these treatments or simply had no alternatives and hoped for the best. Actual physicians, men with formal medical training from European universities or colonial medical schools, are rare and expensive. Most colonists rely on other sources of care: barber surgeons who provide basic procedures, apothecaries who compound and sell medicines, midwives who attend childbirth and women's complaints, and family members who treat illnesses at home using folk remedies passed down through generations. The women of the household are often the primary medical practitioners, dosing sick children with herbal teas, applying poultices to wounds, and providing the nursing care that determines whether patients recover or succumb. Folk medicine fills the gaps left by professional practitioners, drawing on traditions from England, Africa, the Netherlands, and the indigenous peoples who inhabited this land before European arrival. Herbal remedies are the mainstay of folk medicine. Willow bark tea for pain, which actually contains the compound we now synthesize as aspirin. Chamomile for digestive complaints, various roots and leaves for purposes both rational and magical. Some of these remedies work, many do not. All are preferable to the aggressive interventions of professional physicians. Midwifery represents perhaps the most effective medical specialty of the era, at least for normal pregnancies and deliveries. Midwives are experienced women who have attended hundreds of births and developed practical skills that no theoretical training can provide. They know how to turn a breech baby, how to ease a difficult delivery, how to manage the common complications that arise in childbirth. Male physicians are beginning to encroach on midwifery's traditional territory, bringing forceps and other interventions that can save lives in emergencies, but also cause harm when used unnecessarily. The competition between midwives and physicians will continue for centuries, with consequences that historians still argue about. You pass the barber surgeon's shop and walk a little faster, grateful that you're not at this moment in need of medical attention. The colonial medical system is not designed for your benefit. It is designed according to theories that happen to be wrong, administered by practitioners whose training varies wildly, and funded by a fee-for-service model that provides care only to those who can afford it. If you fall seriously ill in colonial New York, your best hope is a strong constitution and the nursing care of family members. Your second best hope is a mild case that resolves on its own. Your worst option, paradoxically, might be the full attention of the medical profession. A commotion ahead draws your attention. A crowd gathering in the market square. Voices raised in that particular tone that signals public spectacle rather than private dispute. You push forward, curiosity overcoming caution, and you find yourself witnessing one of the characteristic entertainments of colonial life, a public punishment, administered in full view of the community as both penalty for the offender and warning to potential wrongdoers. You watch with the uncomfortable mixture of fascination and revulsion that such spectacles have always inspired, thinking about a justice system that operates on principles very different from your own. The punishment in progress is the pillory, that iconic wooden device that holds the offender's head and hands immobile while the crowd does whatever it pleases. The man locked in the pillory today appears to be a merchant convicted of using false weights, cheating customers by making them pay for goods they did not receive. His offence is painted on a sign hanging around his neck, ensuring that even illiterate onlookers understand his crime. The crowd is pelting him with rotten vegetables, eggs, and less identifiable substances, and his face is a mask of humiliation and discomfort. He will stand here for several hours, enduring this abuse, before being released with a fine and a reputation that may never recover. The pillory is one of many public punishments that form the backbone of colonial criminal justice. The stocks serve a similar function, immobilizing the offender's feet rather than head and hands. Whipping posts stand ready in public squares, and convicted criminals receive lashes administered by court order, their backs laid open while crowds watch and cheer. Branding marks certain offenders with permanent signs of their crimes: a T burned into the thumb for theft, a B on the forehead for blasphemy. These punishments are designed to shame as much as to hurt, marking the offender as someone whose word cannot be trusted, whose place in the community has been compromised. More serious crimes warrant more serious punishments. Execution is common for offences that modern jurisprudence would handle with imprisonment. Murder, of course, but also robbery, burglary, arson, counterfeiting, and various crimes against property that the property classes consider particularly threatening. Executions are public spectacles, held on designated hanging days that draw crowds from across the city and surrounding countryside. The condemned are paraded through the streets, forced to listen to sermons about their sins, offered final opportunities for repentance and confession. Then they are hanged, their bodies left to dangle as warnings to others, sometimes for days until the authorities order them cut down. The prison, as a primary form of punishment, barely exists in colonial New York. Jails hold accused persons awaiting trial and convicted debtors serving out their obligations, but long-term incarceration as punishment for crime is rare. The reasons are practical as much as philosophical. Prisons are expensive to build and maintain, and colonial governments lack the resources for extensive institutional infrastructure. It is cheaper and more efficient to punish publicly, to shame, whip, brand, or execute offenders and be done with them, rather than to house and feed them for extended periods at public expense. The justice system that administers these punishments operates according to principles that mix familiar and foreign elements. There are courts, judges, and juries, institutions inherited from English common law that will eventually evolve into the American legal system. Defendants have some rights: to hear the charges against them, to present evidence in their defense, to be tried by a jury of their peers, but these rights are unevenly applied, especially for the poor, the enslaved, and others who lack the social standing to demand fair treatment. Wealthy defendants can afford lawyers. Poor defendants represent themselves. White defendants receive the benefit of the doubt. Black defendants face presumptions of guilt. The criminal code is harsh by modern standards, reflecting an approach to social control that relies on deterrence through terror rather than rehabilitation through correction. Property crimes are punished with particular severity because property is the foundation of social order, and those who threaten property threaten the entire structure of colonial society. Crimes against persons, unless they involve murder or rape, may receive relatively lighter treatment, especially if the victim is of lower social status than the offender. The law is not blind. It sees class, race, gender, and status with perfect clarity and adjusts its judgments accordingly. Historians still argue about whether colonial criminal justice was more or less fair than what came before or after. Compared to the arbitrary justice of medieval Europe, with its torture chambers and secret trials, the colonial system offered at least some procedural protections and public accountability. Compared to modern criminal justice, with its constitutional rights and, in theory, equal treatment under law, the colonial system was brutal, capricious, and openly discriminatory. The truth is probably that justice systems reflect their societies, and colonial New York's justice system reflected a society that was hierarchical, property-focused, and convinced that order required visible public enforcement. You watch the man in the pillory for a few more minutes, then drift away as the spectacle loses its novelty. Tomorrow there will be another punishment, another crowd, another lesson in the consequences of transgression. The system works, or at least it maintains a rough order in a society that lacks police forces, extensive prisons, or other tools of modern social control. Whether it is just is a question that the colonists themselves rarely ask, and that we, from our comfortable distance, cannot definitively answer. You smell the smoke before you see the flames, a sharp, acrid tang that cuts through the usual odours of the street and triggers an immediate visceral response. Your heart rate spikes, your body tenses, you scan the skyline for the telltale orange glow that signals disaster. Fire is the nightmare that haunts every colonial city, the enemy that can destroy in minutes what took years to build, and New York has learned this lesson in the cruelest possible ways. You locate the smoke, rising from a chimney across the city, not from an uncontrolled blaze, and your shoulders relax slightly, though the fear never fully subsides. Colonial New York burns. It burns with depressing regularity, consuming buildings and blocks and sometimes entire neighbourhoods in conflagrations that reshape the urban landscape. The Great Fire of 1776 will eventually destroy nearly a quarter of the city, but smaller fires occur constantly, sparked by cooking accidents, candle mishaps, lightning strikes, and the countless other ignition sources that surround people who live surrounded by flame. Every fireplace is an opportunity for disaster. Every candle is a potential catastrophe. Every forge and kitchen and workshop is a gamble that the flames will stay where they belong. The city is built to burn. Wooden buildings press close together, their roofs sometimes touching, their walls separated by mere inches. The materials of construction, timber framing, wooden siding, wooden shingles, are essentially kindling waiting for a spark. Fire codes exist on paper, requiring brick chimneys and prohibiting certain dangerous practices, but enforcement is sporadic and compliance is incomplete. The expense of fireproof construction puts it beyond the reach of most builders, and the pressure to build quickly in a growing city often trumps safety considerations. Firefighting in colonial New York is a community affair, organised through volunteer fire companies that represent one of the few forms of civic organisation available to ordinary citizens. These companies own and maintain the firefighting equipment, leather buckets, hand-operated pumps, hooks and ladders, and their members train together, socialise together, and race to fires together when the alarm sounds. Competition between companies is fierce. Arriving first at a fire is a point of honour, and companies sometimes fight each other for the privilege of leading the response. This competitive spirit provides motivation but also creates chaos, as companies argue about tactics while buildings burn. The technology of firefighting is primitive by modern standards. Bucket brigades form human chains from the nearest water source to the fire, passing leather buckets hand to hand in a desperate attempt to pour enough water on the flames to make a difference. Hand-operated pumps can project water streams more effectively, but they require teams of men to operate and access to water supplies that may not be conveniently located. Hooks and axes are used to tear down burning buildings before the fire can spread, sacrificing structures that might have been saved to protect their neighbours. The concept of surrounding a fire and containing it is well understood. The practical challenges of implementing this strategy in a city of narrow streets and crowded buildings are immense. When fires do get out of control, the results are devastating. The fire that burned through the city's commercial district in 1741, suspected at the time to be arson by enslaved people and poor whites, though historians still argue about the truth, destroyed dozens of buildings and created panic that led to mass executions. Smaller fires regularly leave families homeless, businesses destroyed, life savings reduced to ash. Insurance against fire exists in rudimentary form, but coverage is expensive and claims are often disputed. Most fire victims simply absorb their losses and start over, if they have the resources to do so, or fall into poverty if they do not. The psychological weight of fire fear is difficult for modern readers to fully appreciate. You check your candles obsessively before sleeping, ensuring that every flame is extinguished and every ember is safely contained. You teach your children the dangers of fire before they can fully understand, impressing upon them the consequences of carelessness. You lie awake some nights, listening for the cry of fire that might send you rushing into the streets in your nightclothes, watching everything you own go up in flames. This is not paranoia, this is prudence, based on direct experience of fires that have claimed your neighbours' homes if not your own. The rebuilding that follows major fires often brings improvements. Brick construction replacing wood, wider streets replacing narrow lanes, fire codes with more teeth. But these improvements come at the cost of tragedy, and are always incomplete. The city grows faster than it can be made safe, adding new wooden structures to replace the ones that burned, perpetuating the cycle of construction and destruction that defines pre-modern urban life. Fire will remain New York's constant companion until the 20th century, when modern building codes, professional fire departments, and fire-resistant materials finally bring the threat under control. You pass a fire company's engine house, where the hand pump and buckets wait for the next alarm, and you nod respectfully to the men gathered outside. They are ordinary citizens, craftsmen, merchants, labourers, who have volunteered to risk their lives when the fires come. They are imperfect heroes, sometimes drunk, sometimes quarrelsome, sometimes more interested in glory than effectiveness. But they are what the city has, and when the flames rise and the panic spreads, they are the ones who run toward the danger while everyone else runs away. You're grateful for their service, even as you pray you never need it. Your mouth is dry, a reminder that you have walked for hours without drinking, and your thoughts turn toward water, that essential substance that modern people take utterly for granted but that colonial New Yorkers regard with a mixture of necessity and suspicion. You spot a public well ahead, a simple wooden structure covering a shaft that reaches down to the groundwater below and you join the queue of people waiting to fill their buckets and jugs. The water that emerges will be cool and will relieve your thirst. Whether it will make you sick is another question entirely. The water supply of colonial New York is, to put it bluntly, disgusting. The city lacks anything resembling a modern water system. No treatment plants, no distribution pipes, no quality standards. Residents obtain water from private wells dug in their own yards, from public wells maintained by the city, from the collect pond that lies north of the settled area, and from rain barrels that capture whatever falls from the sky. Each source has its problems, and none can be trusted without reservation. Private wells are convenient, but are often contaminated by the privies that sit nearby in every yard. The soil of lower Manhattan is porous. Waste deposited in the outhouse seeps through the ground and eventually reaches the water table, bringing with it bacteria, parasites, and disease. The connection between contaminated water and illness is not yet understood. Germ theory lies a century in the future. But observant colonists notice that some wells produce water that makes people sick while others seem safer. The reasons remain mysterious, attributed to bad air or miasmas or God's inscrutable will. Public wells are marginally better, maintained by the city and located at some distance from the worst sources of contamination. But public wells are shared by hundreds of users, and the buckets and ropes that draw water are touched by countless hands, creating opportunities for disease transmission that no one yet understands. The wells run dry during droughts and freeze during harsh winters, and they are never sufficient to meet the needs of a growing population. Water scarcity is a chronic problem, forcing residents to pay carriers who haul water from distant sources or to make do with less. The Collect Pond, a large freshwater body located where modern Chinatown now stands, provides water for many colonial New Yorkers, but has its own problems. The pond receives runoff from the surrounding hills, including waste from tanneries, slaughterhouses, and other industries that dump their effluent into convenient waterways. As the city grows, the pond becomes increasingly polluted, its waters discoloured and foul-smelling, even as residents continue to draw from it for lack of alternatives. Eventually, in the early 19th century, the pond will be drained and filled, its toxic legacy buried beneath new development, including, ironically, the courthouses where people will be sentenced for crimes that are themselves legacies of the area's poverty and neglect. Given these challenges, it is no wonder that colonists prefer to drink almost anything other than water. Ale, beer, cider, wine, and rum are safer alternatives, their alcohol content killing pathogens that water cannot resist. Tea and coffee, boiled in preparation, are similarly safe, though their expense limits their consumption to those who can afford imported luxuries. Milk is available for those who keep cows or can afford to buy from those who do, but milk spoils quickly and can carry its own diseases, including tuberculosis from infected cattle. The safest beverages are the fermented ones, and colonial drinking patterns reflect this biological reality. The lack of clean water affects every aspect of daily life. Bathing is infrequent, in part because of water scarcity, and in part because of beliefs that bathing is unhealthy, that opening the pores allows disease to enter the body, that removing the body's natural oils weakens its defences. People wash their faces and hands, perhaps, but full-body immersion is rare, reserved for special occasions if it occurs at all. The smell of unwashed humanity is a constant feature of colonial life, so pervasive that people stop noticing it, except when confronted with someone whose hygiene is exceptional or exceptionally poor. Laundry consumes enormous quantities of water and labour, which is one reason why it is done so infrequently. Washing clothes requires hauling water, heating it over a fire, scrubbing with harsh lye soap, rinsing, wringing and drying, a process that can take an entire day for a single household's laundry. Domestic servants or enslaved workers perform this labour in wealthy households. In poorer families, the women of the house do it themselves, adding laundry to the endless list of tasks that fill their days. Clean clothes are a luxury, and most colonists wear their garments until they are visibly soiled, relying on the shift worn beneath outer clothing to absorb sweat and body oils. You reach the front of the queue, lower your bucket into the well, and draw up water that looks clear enough. You drink cautiously, trying not to think about what invisible contaminants might be swimming in each mouthful. The water is cool and wet and relieves your thirst, and that will have to be enough. You cannot escape the colonial water system. You can only hope that today's drink will not be the one that lays you low with fever or flux. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans were healthier or sicker than their European counterparts, but the water supply, or lack thereof, must have played a significant role in whatever the answer turns out to be. The sun begins its descent toward the horizon, and the city's rhythm shifts from labour to leisure, from the grinding productivity of the working day to whatever entertainments the evening hours might offer. You have been working since dawn, your body is tired, and your mind craves diversion. Colonial New York provides options, though they differ markedly from the streaming services and social media that occupy modern evenings. You set off in search of amusement, curious to see how your ancestors, or the people who might have been your ancestors, spent their precious hours of freedom. Taverns remain the centre of social life after dark, as they are during the day, but the evening crowd is different from the midday diners. Now the tables fill with men who have finished their work and have time to linger, nursing their drinks and swapping stories until closing time. The conversation flows more freely as the ale takes effect, ranging from neighbourhood gossip to political debate to bawdy jokes that would make modern audiences blush. Gambling is common despite laws that technically prohibit it. Card games, dice games, and wagering on anything that can be bet upon. The tavern keeper looks the other way, as long as the games remain peaceful and the tab continues to grow. Cockfighting draws crowds to establishments that cater to this particular entertainment. 2 roosters, specially bred and trained for combat, are placed in a ring and encouraged to fight until one is dead or too injured to continue. Spectators bet on the outcome, cheering their chosen champion and groaning when it falls. The violence is graphic. These are birds equipped with sharp spurs that tear flesh and draw blood. But the crowd views it as sport, no more objectionable than modern boxing or mixed martial arts. Animal rights, as a concept, barely exists. Animals are property, tools, food sources and entertainment, valued for their utility rather than their welfare. Bear baiting and bull baiting offer similarly violent diversions, though they are less common in the city than in the countryside. A bear or bull is chained to a stake and attacked by dogs, the animals fighting until exhaustion or death while spectators place bets and cheer. These entertainments are old, stretching back to medieval England and beyond, and they will eventually be banned as public sensibilities shift toward greater concern for animal suffering. For now, they remain legal, popular, and unremarkable. Theatre offers a somewhat more refined alternative, though colonial New York's theatrical scene is modest compared to London or even Philadelphia. Travelling theatre companies perform plays, Shakespeare, popular comedies, moral dramas, in whatever venues they can secure, from dedicated playhouses to tavern rooms to converted warehouses. The audience is boisterous by modern theatre standards, talking, drinking and commenting on the action throughout the performance. Throwing things at actors whose performance disappoints is not unknown. Theatre attracts moral criticism from religious authorities who view it as a school of vice, but popular demand ensures that performances continue despite clerical disapproval. Music fills the taverns and sometimes spills into the streets, performed by amateur musicians who have learned their craft by ear and by practice. Fiddles are common, along with flutes, drums, and whatever other instruments are available. The songs are folk tunes brought from Europe and Africa, sea shanties learned from sailors, popular ballads that spread from colony to colony. Dancing accompanies the music when space permits. Country dances, jigs and reels that require little formal training and maximum enthusiasm. You might join a dance if the spirit moves you, swinging partners across a packed tavern floor while the fiddler plays faster and faster. Quieter entertainments are available for those who prefer them. Reading, for those who can read, offers access to newspapers, pamphlets, and the occasional book borrowed from a friend or purchased from a bookseller. Chess and checkers provide intellectual challenge without the moral hazards of gambling. Walking along the waterfront as the sun sets offers natural beauty that costs nothing. Courting couples find corners where they can enjoy each other's company with whatever degree of privacy colonial architecture allows, which is to say, not much privacy at all. The wealthy have access to entertainments that remain out of reach for ordinary colonists. Private parties and elegant homes feature fine food, expensive wine, and music performed by hired musicians. Balls and dances bring together the colonial elite in displays of fashion and social grace. Gentlemen's clubs offer exclusive spaces where merchants and professionals can network, gossip, and conduct business away from the common crowd. The gap between rich and poor is visible in entertainment as in everything else, but the basic human need for amusement crosses all class boundaries. The evening winds down as it must, constrained by darkness in a city without streetlights. Candles are expensive, oil lamps smoke and smell, and even the full moon provides only limited visibility in streets overshadowed by tall buildings. Most colonists go to bed shortly after sunset, not from choice, but from practical necessity. There is no point staying awake when you cannot see to do anything useful, and the workday will begin again at dawn regardless of how late you stay up. You find your way home through darkening streets, navigating by memory and occasional moonlight, ready to collapse onto your straw mattress and surrender to sleep. Love is in the air, or at least calculation is, which in colonial New York often amounts to the same thing. You have noticed someone, a figure who appears at the market or at church or in the neighbourhood, and your heart has begun to flutter in ways that transcend mere friendship. But romance in the 18th century is not the free-form emotional adventure that modern people experience. It is a negotiation, a transaction, a careful balancing of desire against practical considerations that range from property and family alliance to simple survival. You enter the dance of courtship with your eyes open, knowing that love may or may not follow where prudence leads. Marriage in colonial New York is fundamentally an economic institution, whatever romantic feelings might accompany it. When you marry, you merge households, combining the resources and labour of two individuals and their families into a single productive unit. A good marriage strengthens both parties. A bad marriage can mean poverty, conflict, and social disgrace. Parents take an active role in their children's marital choices, sometimes arranging matches directly and almost always exercising veto power over unsuitable candidates. The notion that young people should marry whoever they please, regardless of family concerns, is considered dangerously radical. For women, the economic stakes of marriage are particularly high. A woman who does not marry faces limited options, dependence on relatives, domestic service, or one of the few trades open to women such as midwifery or mantua making. The woman who marries well gains security, status, and the protection of a husband who controls the household's finances and legal affairs. Under the doctrine of coverture, a married woman's legal identity is subsumed into her husband's. She cannot own property, sign contracts, or sue in court without his permission. Marriage is not just an economic partnership, but a legal merger, in which the wife's separate existence largely disappears. Courtship follows established patterns, though the specifics vary by class and community. Young people meet through family connections, at church, in the market, at social gatherings where respectable mingling is permitted. They talk, walk together, attend events in company with chaperones who ensure that nothing improper occurs. Letters are exchanged, carefully worded to balance affection with propriety. Gifts are given, tokens of regard that carry symbolic meaning, a ribbon, a piece of lace, a carved trinket that the beloved can treasure as evidence of devotion. The physical realities of colonial life complicate courtship in ways that modern people rarely consider. Privacy is almost impossible to obtain. Houses are small, families are large, and someone is always watching. The opportunities for romantic encounter are constrained by lack of space, lack of time, and the constant surveillance of family and community. And yet pregnancies before marriage are not uncommon, suggesting that couples find ways to be together despite the obstacles. A pregnancy typically accelerates the wedding. The child born 6 months after the ceremony is politely attributed to prematurity, and everyone pretends not to notice. Bundling is one solution to the privacy problem, and it strikes modern readers as bizarre. In this practice, a courting couple is permitted to spend the night together in the same bed, fully clothed or with a bundling board between them, getting to know each other intimately without, theoretically, engaging in sexual intercourse. The practice is controversial. Moralists condemn it as an invitation to sin, while defenders argue that it allows young people to develop genuine compatibility before committing to marriage. Historians still argue about how common bundling actually was, and whether the bundling board actually prevented what it was designed to prevent. Once a couple agrees to marry, the formal process begins. Bans are published in church, announcing the intended marriage and inviting anyone who knows of impediments to come forward. A marriage license can substitute for bans, obtained from colonial authorities for a fee that only the prosperous can afford. The wedding itself is typically a simple affair, a ceremony in the home or church, witnesses, a clergyman or magistrate to officiate, perhaps a modest celebration afterward. Elaborate weddings with white dresses and lavish receptions are a later invention. Colonial weddings are functional events that accomplish the legal and religious joining of two people. What happens after marriage is the subject of considerably less historical documentation than the courtship that precedes it. Married couples live and work together, raise children if children come, navigate the conflicts and compromises that accompany any intimate relationship. Divorce is virtually impossible to obtain. Separation is possible but legally complicated and socially disgraceful. Happy couples typically endure, maintaining outward appearances while living in private misery. Happy couples presumably exist, but happiness leaves fewer records than conflict, and the archive skews toward dramatic problems rather than quiet contentment. Widowhood comes for many, often early and repeatedly. You might marry young, lose a spouse to disease or accident within a few years, remarry, and lose that spouse too, cycling through partners in a way that reflects the mortality rates of the era. Widows have slightly more legal autonomy than married women. They can own property, run businesses, appear in court, and some thrive in their independence. Widowers typically remarry quickly, needing someone to manage the household and care for any surviving children. The marriage market includes many participants who have been through this process before, bringing children, debts, and complications from previous unions. You think about all of this as you catch sight of the person who has caught your attention, navigating the complexities of courtship in an era when love and calculation are intertwined beyond separation. Perhaps your heart will win. Perhaps your head will prevail. Perhaps you will find a match that satisfies both. For now, you simply watch and wonder and dream of possibilities constrained by circumstances you did not choose. The door closes behind you, and you are home, such as it is. The space is cramped, dim, filled with people and possessions jostling for room in an area that feels barely adequate for half its current occupants. This is domestic life in colonial New York, and it looks nothing like the comfortable separation of rooms and functions that modern architecture provides. You share this space with family, servants, boarders, and sometimes strangers, and privacy is a concept that exists more in aspiration than in practice. The physical layout of a typical colonial home depends on your economic circumstances, but even wealthy households lack the square footage that modern Americans consider essential. A prosperous merchant might live in a house with multiple rooms, a parlour for receiving guests, a kitchen for cooking, bedrooms for sleeping, but even these rooms serve multiple functions and host multiple activities simultaneously. A poor family might occupy a single room in which cooking, eating, sleeping and working all occur, with minimal separation between activities that modern people consider fundamentally distinct. Sleeping arrangements reflect the crowding. Beds are shared, spouses sleep together of course, but so do siblings, servants, and visitors. Children might sleep with parents or with each other, sometimes 4 or 5 to a bed if the family is large and space is limited. Servants and enslaved workers might sleep in the kitchen, in the attic, in any corner where a pallet can be laid. The idea of every person having their own bedroom, their own space for solitude and retreat, is unimaginable except for the very wealthy. The household includes more than the nuclear family that modern Americans might expect. Extended family members, grandparents, unmarried aunts and uncles, orphaned cousins, might live under the same roof. Servants occupy an ambiguous position, neither family nor strangers, present for all domestic activities yet subordinate in status. Apprentices typically live with their masters, joining the household for the duration of their training. Boarders rent space, contributing to household income while sharing meals and common areas. The result is a shifting population that ebbs and flows with economic circumstances, life events, and the countless contingencies of colonial existence. The work of maintaining a household falls primarily on women, though the specific tasks vary by class. Wealthy women supervise servants and manage household accounts. Poor women do the physical labour themselves. Cooking consumes hours every day, from building and maintaining fires to preparing ingredients to actual cooking to cleaning up afterward. Cleaning is endless in an era of dirt floors, open hearths, and minimal cleaning supplies. Laundry, as we discussed earlier, is a massive undertaking requiring water, fire, soap, and muscle. Sewing, mending, spinning, and other textile work fill whatever time remains. The domestic workload is crushing, and it falls disproportionately on female shoulders. Children contribute to household work from young ages, performing tasks that match their developing abilities. Small children might mind younger siblings, fetch water, gather eggs, or perform simple kitchen tasks. Older children take on more substantial responsibilities, working alongside adults in whatever occupations the household pursues. The concept of childhood as a period free from labour is foreign here. Children are small workers, valued for their contributions and trained for their eventual adult roles. The emotional texture of household life is harder to reconstruct than its physical arrangement. Families love each other, presumably, in ways that transcend the formal obligations of the era. Parents care for children, spouses support each other, siblings form bonds that last lifetimes. But these relationships exist within structures of authority and hierarchy that feel alien to modern sensibilities. Fathers rule households with near absolute power, wives and children are subject to their authority, expected to obey and defer in matters large and small. The warmth of family affection coexists with the coldness of patriarchal control, and historians still argue about how these competing dynamics shaped actual lived experience. Conflict is inevitable in such close quarters. Family disputes, personality clashes, competition for limited resources, all of these generate tension that must be managed somehow. The options for escape are limited. You cannot simply move out, cannot easily divorce a spouse or fire a servant, cannot separate yourself from people with whom you share every waking and sleeping hour. People develop coping mechanisms, strategic avoidance, ritualized interaction patterns, outlets for tension that range from healthy to destructive. Domestic violence exists, tolerated or ignored by a legal system that considers what happens within the household to be largely private. You settle into your corner of the domestic space, carving out what little privacy you can through strategic positioning and sheer force of will. The sounds of the household surround you, voices, footsteps, the clatter of cookware, the cry of a child. This is your world, your people, your life. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but comfort is relative, and the colonists who lived this way knew no alternative. They made homes in these crowded spaces, loved and fought and raised children, created the continuity that connects their time to ours. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the domestic symphony, and you feel a strange kinship with those who came before. The last light fades from the sky, and darkness descends on colonial New York with a completeness that modern city dwellers never experience. There are no streetlights, no illuminated signs, no glow from 1,000 windows that collectively push back the night. There is only the moon when it shines, the stars when clouds permit, and the scattered points of candlelight that mark where people still linger over late activities. You peer into the darkness outside your window and feel the weight of night pressing against the walls, a presence that cannot be ignored. The night watch begins its rounds, and you hear the cry that echoes through the streets, the hour, the weather, a declaration that all is well, or a warning that it is not. The watchmen are your city's first line of defence against the dangers that darkness brings, and their presence is both reassuring and comical. Some are diligent, patrolling their assigned routes with lanterns and clubs, alert for fires, crimes and disturbances. Others are less reliable, elderly men who took the position because they needed the income, sleeping in doorways and making their calls by habit rather than observation. The night watch is a civic duty that falls on householders in rotation, though those with means often pay substitutes to serve in their place. The quality of protection depends on who shows up, and the results are predictably uneven. Crimes occur in the darkness, robberies, assaults, acts of disorder that would be prevented or detected in daylight. Fires start and spread while watchmen nap or gossip, their warnings coming too late to save buildings or lives. The system works imperfectly, but it is what the city has, and reformers who propose alternatives face resistance from those who benefit from the current arrangements. Dangers lurk in the unlit streets beyond the obvious crimes of violence and theft. The roadways themselves become hazards after dark. Holes, ruts, debris invisible until you stumble over them. The harbour's edge is treacherous for those who wander too close without being able to see where the land ends and the water begins. Animals continue their activity regardless of human schedules. Rats, feral dogs, and other creatures make the night their own, and there are humans who operate in darkness by choice, conducting business, legal or otherwise, that benefits from concealment. Curfews attempt to control movement after dark, particularly for enslaved people and other populations considered potentially threatening. Enslaved individuals must carry passes to travel at night and are subject to arrest if found without proper documentation. Taverns close at designated hours, theoretically pushing patrons home before they can cause too much trouble. These regulations are enforced unevenly. Wealthy white men can often ignore rules that apply strictly to others, but they shape the nocturnal landscape nonetheless. The sounds of night differ from the sounds of day in ways that take getting used to. Gone is the constant bustle of commerce, the shouts of vendors and arguments of merchants. In its place comes a deeper quiet, interrupted by occasional footsteps, distant voices, the bark of dogs, the cry of the watch. Sounds carry differently in the cold night air, seeming closer and more significant than they would in the noise of daytime. Every creak, every footfall, every unexpected noise triggers alertness in those who have learned to associate darkness with danger. Night is also the time when colonists are most vulnerable to their own fears and imaginings. The darkness conceals not just physical dangers, but supernatural ones, or so many believe. Ghosts, witches, demons, the spirit world that Christianity officially demotes to superstition, but that folk belief keeps alive, becomes more present in the hours when sight fails and imagination takes over. Parents warn children about what lurks in the dark. Adults carry those warnings into maturity, modified but not eliminated by age and experience. The Enlightenment is spreading rational skepticism among the educated, but for most ordinary people, the night remains haunted by forces that daylight dispels. Artificial lighting is precious and expensive. Candles are the primary technology, made from tallow, animal fat, for ordinary use, or from beeswax for those who can afford the luxury. A candle provides a small pool of light, enough to read by or to work by if the work is not too demanding, but hardly enough to illuminate an entire room. Oil lamps offer somewhat better light but produce smoke and smell, and consume fuel that must be purchased or produced. Even wealthy households economize on lighting, concentrating activities in single rooms rather than scattering light throughout the house. You think about all of this as you prepare for bed, the single candle on your table casting shadows that dance on the walls. Outside, the night watch makes another round, his cry fading into the distance. The city sleeps mostly, though somewhere people are still awake, working, drinking, loving, scheming, doing whatever they do in hours when respectable folk are in bed. You blow out your candle and let the darkness take you, joining the millions before you who have surrendered to night and trusted that morning would come again. The seasons turn, as they always have and always will, and you feel their passage in your body before you mark it on any calendar. Colonial New York exists in intimate relationship with the natural world, its rhythms governed by patterns of weather and daylight that modern climate control has largely erased. You shiver through the winters, sweat through the summers, and adjust every aspect of daily life to accommodate the planet's tilt on its axis. There is no escape from the seasons. There is only endurance and adaptation. Winter arrives with a ferocity that modern New Yorkers, insulated by central heating and down jackets, can barely imagine. The cold penetrates everything. Walls that offer minimal insulation. Windows that are either oiled paper or expensive glass that radiates chill. Ice forms on the insides of windows, on water buckets left overnight, on anything that moisture touches. The fire that burns in your hearth is the only barrier between you and temperatures that can kill, and maintaining that fire becomes a constant preoccupation. Firewood must be gathered or purchased, stored somewhere dry, brought inside, and fed to the flames in an endless cycle of combustion and consumption. Clothing provides protection, layers upon layers that trap body heat and buffer against the wind. Wool is essential, scratchy and uncomfortable, but warm in ways that lighter fabrics cannot match. Cloaks and coats wrap the body. Hats and hoods protect heads and ears. Mittens and muffs keep fingers functional. Still, the cold finds ways in. Exploiting gaps and seams, numbing extremities despite every precaution. Frostbite is a genuine danger for those who spend extended time outdoors, and the very old, the very young, and the very poor die every winter from cold-related causes. Winter also brings difficulties of navigation and supply. Snow accumulates in streets that have no snowplows, creating drifts that can reach windowsills and block doorways. Ice makes every step treacherous, and falls are common, sometimes with serious consequences. The harbour freezes in especially cold winters, interrupting the trade that sustains the city's economy. Food prices rise as supplies dwindle, and transportation becomes difficult. Winter is a season of scarcity, of drawing on stored provisions and hoping they last until spring. Yet winter also brings its own pleasures, appreciated by colonists who lack the option of waiting indoors for warmer weather. Ice skating becomes possible when ponds and rivers freeze solid, and people of all ages take to the ice for exercise and entertainment. Sleigh rides replace wheeled transportation, the bells on horses jingling through the crisp air. The cold preserves food, allowing for storage that would be impossible in warmer months. A ham hung in an unheated room will keep for weeks, freeing households from the constant struggle against spoilage. Summer presents opposite challenges, equally daunting in their own way. The heat and humidity of a New York summer are oppressive even with modern air conditioning. Without it, they are nearly unbearable. There is no relief from the temperature except shade, water, and the hope of a breeze. Work continues despite the heat. Commerce does not pause for climate, and labourers suffer through conditions that would constitute health hazards by modern occupational safety standards. The smell of summer is distinctive and unpleasant. Heat accelerates the decay of organic matter, intensifying the odours of garbage, manure, and privy pits that are always present but become overwhelming in hot weather. Flies swarm in numbers that defy belief, attracted by the rotting material and breeding at rates that no amount of swatting can control. Food spoils quickly, creating waste and risk and economic loss. Summer is the season of fever and flux, when disease spreads most readily and mortality spikes. The seasonal rhythms affect work, diet, social life, and virtually every other aspect of existence. Farmers plant in spring and harvest in fall, and the city's markets reflect these cycles, abundant with fresh produce in warm months and limited to stored goods in winter. Daylight determines working hours. Long summer days mean more productive time. Short winter days force work to stop or continue by expensive candlelight. Social gatherings shift between indoor and outdoor venues, between hearths and gardens, following the sun's annual journey. Historians still argue about whether colonists experienced the seasons more intensely than we do, having no escape from weather's demands, or whether they simply accepted conditions that we would find intolerable. The truth is probably both. They felt the cold and heat as keenly as we would, but they had no expectation of relief, and therefore developed psychological and cultural adaptations that made endurance possible. The seasons were facts of life, unavoidable as gravity, and complaining about them was as pointless as complaining about the tides. You watch the sky, reading the clouds for signs of the weather to come, developing the forecasting instincts that come from paying attention to the natural world. A ring around the moon predicts precipitation. A red sunset promises fair weather. The behaviour of animals signals changes before they arrive. This meteorological awareness, second nature to colonial people, has largely atrophied in the modern world, replaced by weather apps and climate-controlled environments. But here, now, in this imagined colonial existence, you feel the seasons in your bones and you adjust your life accordingly. The funeral procession passes through the street, and you stop to watch, removing your hat in respect for the dead. A plain wooden coffin is borne on the shoulders of 4 men, followed by mourners in black, or as close to black as their wardrobes allow, since true mourning dress is expensive and not everyone can afford it. Someone has died, as someone always is dying in colonial New York, and the community gathers to mark the passage with whatever ceremony custom requires. Death is everywhere in this world, impossible to ignore or deny. The mortality rates are stunning by modern standards. Roughly 1 in 4 children dies before age 5, and life expectancy, even for those who survive childhood, hovers around 40 or 50 years. You have already, in this imagined colonial life, experienced deaths. Parents, siblings, friends, neighbours, perhaps children of your own. You will experience more, and eventually you will be the one in the coffin, carried through the streets by people who will themselves be carried in turn. This is not morbidity. This is realism. The acknowledgement of facts that every colonial person lives with every day. The presence of death shapes life in ways that comfortable modern minds can barely grasp. You think about mortality constantly, reminded by the frequent funerals, by the graves in the churchyard you pass regularly, by the illnesses that strike without warning and kill without mercy. Religious authorities encourage this meditation, urging you to prepare your soul for an end that could come at any moment. Memento mori, remember you will die, is not just a Latin phrase but a practical philosophy, a recognition that today might be your last and you had better be ready. Children learn about death early and intimately. They attend funerals, view corpses laid out in family parlours, watch coffins lowered into graves. They lose siblings, playmates, parents, at ages when modern children are still protected from mortality's reality. The children's books of the era, those that exist, often focus on death, warning young readers to prepare their souls and live virtuous lives because God might call them home at any moment. This sounds grim to modern ears, but it reflects the actual conditions of colonial childhood, where death was not an abstraction but a constant presence. Burial practices follow established patterns that mix religious observance with practical necessity. Bodies are typically buried within a day or two of death, before decomposition becomes too advanced. There is no embalming, no refrigeration, no way to preserve remains for extended viewing. The funeral service, conducted by a minister if one is available, emphasizes the spiritual aspects of death, the fate of the soul, the promise of resurrection, the judgment that awaits all sinners. The body is laid in a simple wooden coffin, buried in a churchyard or cemetery, marked with a headstone if the family can afford one. Mourning rituals impose obligations on the survivors that can last for months or years. Widows are expected to wear black, to withdraw from social life, to observe periods of formal mourning that signal their grief and their respectability. Business dealings are modified to accommodate bereavement. Social invitations are declined. The rhythms of normal life give way to the special demands of loss. These rituals provide structure for grief, channeling the chaotic emotions of bereavement into prescribed patterns that the community understands and supports. The economics of death cannot be ignored. Funeral expenses fall on survivors who may already be struggling. The cost of coffin, ceremony, burial plot and headstone constrain modest budgets. Estates must be settled, debts paid, property distributed according to wills, or, in the absence of wills, according to legal formulas that may not reflect the wishes of the deceased. Widows and orphans face uncertain futures, dependent on whatever provisions have been made for them, and on the charity of family and community. Yet death also creates opportunities, grim as that sounds. Inheritances transfer wealth from one generation to the next, sometimes catapulting heirs into prosperity they could not have achieved on their own. Widows inherit businesses that they operate with varying degrees of success, some becoming formidable businesswomen in their own right. The death of a master creates openings for apprentices and journeymen who have been waiting for chances to advance. The social structure reshuffles with every death, creating spaces that survivors move to fill. Historians still argue about whether colonial Americans were more accepting of death than we are, whether their constant exposure to mortality produced a psychological resilience that modern people lack, or whether they felt the same grief and terror that we would feel, merely expressed within different cultural forms. The truth is probably that death is always hard, always painful, always fundamentally unacceptable to the human beings who must face it. The colonists wept for their dead, missed them, carried the weight of loss through all their remaining days. They simply had no option to pretend that death was not real, that it could be hidden away in hospitals and nursing homes, that they could live as if immortal. The funeral procession passes out of sight, and you replace your hat, returning to the business of living. Somewhere in the city, a baby is being born, beginning the journey that ends for everyone in the same place. The cycle continues, birth and death braided together in an endless pattern that gives shape to human existence. You will die someday. Everyone does. But not today. Not yet. You walk on, carrying your mortality lightly for now, knowing that the time will come when you can no longer set it aside. Something is changing in the air, a tension you can feel even if you cannot quite name it. The conversations in taverns have an edge they did not have before. The arguments about taxes and representation grow sharper, more personal, more dangerous. You are living through the early stirrings of something enormous, something that will eventually transform these British colonies into an independent nation, though you cannot know this yet. You only know that the old certainties seem less certain, that the relationship between colony and mother country is straining in ways that make you uneasy. The specific grievances accumulate over the decades like sediment, each new irritation settling on top of earlier ones until the weight becomes impossible to bear. Taxes imposed without colonial consent, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the duties on tea and paper and paint. Trade restrictions that benefit English merchants at colonial expense, soldiers quartered in colonial homes, eating colonial food, enforcing laws that colonists consider unjust. Each measure seems reasonable to authorities in London and outrageous to subjects in New York, and the gap between these perspectives widens with every passing year. The ideas that will eventually fuel revolution circulate through the population, spreading from educated elites to ordinary citizens through sermons, pamphlets, and tavern conversations. Natural rights. The notion that all people are born with certain liberties that no government can legitimately violate. The social contract. The theory that governments derive their authority from the consent of the governed and can be dissolved when they betray that consent. These are radical ideas, dangerous ideas, ideas that challenge the fundamental assumptions of monarchical government. They're also increasingly popular, especially among colonists who have come to see British rule as a threat rather than a protection. New York is not the most radical of the colonies. That distinction belongs to Massachusetts, with its Boston firebrands and its tea parties and its readiness for confrontation. But New York has its own agitators, its own movements, its own contributions to the gathering storm. The Sons of Liberty organise protests against British policies, sometimes peaceful and sometimes violent. Merchants resist unpopular taxes through boycotts and smuggling. Newspapers print increasingly bold criticisms of royal authority, testing the limits of what can be said and pushing those limits further with each edition. Yet the path to revolution is neither straight nor inevitable, and many colonists resist the radical turn. Loyalists, those who believe the colonies should remain part of the British Empire, who value order and tradition over uncertain change, are numerous and powerful, especially among the colonial elite. The merchant class that benefits from imperial trade connections has good reasons to fear independence. The established churches that depend on royal patronage have institutional interests in maintaining the status quo. The outcome of the struggle between patriots and loyalists is not predetermined. It will be decided by events, by personalities, by factors that no one can fully control or predict. The ordinary people of New York experience this political turmoil as a backdrop to their daily lives, sometimes dramatic and sometimes easy to ignore. Politics is the province of men, specifically propertied white men who have the right to vote and hold office. Women, the poor, the enslaved, the majority of the population, are excluded from formal political participation, though they are not entirely without influence. They form mobs, participate in boycotts, express opinions that shape the climate in which decisions are made. They will experience the consequences of revolution whether they support it or not. You listen to the arguments, weigh the evidence, try to form your own opinion about where this is all heading. The patriots make compelling points about liberty and self-government. The loyalists raise legitimate concerns about disorder and uncertainty. You know people on both sides, and you can see the merit in both positions. Perhaps the tensions will ease, the grievances will be addressed, and life will return to normal. Or perhaps something more dramatic is coming. Something that will transform the world you know into something completely different. Historians still argue about when the American Revolution became inevitable, or whether it was ever truly inevitable at all. The contingencies are endless, the turning points numerous, the alternative paths tantalizing to imagine. What if Parliament had been more conciliatory? What if colonial leaders had been less radical? What if a single battle had gone differently? The revolution that actually happened was the product of specific choices made by specific people in specific circumstances, and nothing about it was predetermined. But all of that lies in the future, a future you cannot see from where you stand in this imagined colonial present. For now there is only the tension, the uncertainty, the sense that something important is happening, even if you cannot grasp its full significance. You finish your drink, step out into the street, and wonder what tomorrow will bring. The world is changing around you, and you are changing with it, whether you want to or not. History does not ask permission. It simply happens, sweeping everyone along in its current, depositing them in places they never expected to reach. The candle is burned low, its flame guttering in the draught that finds its way through cracks in the wall, and you realise that the hour has grown late, later than you intended. The household has quieted around you, the other occupants already surrendered to sleep. They're breathing a soft rhythm beneath the deeper silence of the night. You set aside whatever you are doing, reading, perhaps, or writing, or simply staring into the dying fire, and prepare yourself for bed, knowing that dawn will come too soon and the demands of another day with it. You remove your outer clothes carefully, hanging them where they will be ready for morning, smoothing wrinkles that would otherwise set overnight. The ritual is so familiar that you barely think about it anymore, your hands moving through motions practiced 10,000 times. You pour water from a pitcher into a basin, splash your face, wipe your hands, the water cool against skin that has absorbed the day's grime. A quick prayer, perhaps, or simply a moment of stillness before you blow out the candle and let the darkness take the room. The mattress receives you with its familiar lumps and hollows, the straw inside shifting as you settle your weight. The blankets are heavy, coarse wool that scratches where it touches bare skin but holds warmth in ways that lighter fabrics cannot match. You pull them close, creating a cocoon of relative comfort against the chill that seeps through the walls, and you feel your body begin to relax, the tension of the day slowly releasing from muscles that have worked since dawn. The sounds of the night reach you through the walls, the distant cry of the watch, the bark of a dog, the creak of a building settling on its foundations. These are the sounds that have accompanied your sleep for as long as you can remember, so familiar that they register less as noise than as texture, part of the ambient reality that defines your world. Somewhere in the city someone is still awake, still working or drinking or loving or scheming, but you are done for now, ready to let go and drift. Your thoughts wander as sleep approaches, touching on the events of the day, the plans for tomorrow, the larger questions that hover at the edges of consciousness. You think about the people you saw today, the transactions you completed, the conversations you had. You think about the city outside your window, that cramped and chaotic and endlessly surprising place that has become your home. You think about the wider world beyond the city, the colonies and the empire and the vast expanses of ocean and land that connect them. So much is happening, so much is changing, and here you are, one small person in one small room, doing your best to navigate forces you cannot control. The past and the future blur together in the liminal space between waking and sleeping. You remember things that happened years ago, moments that surface unbidden from the depths of memory. You imagine things that might happen tomorrow or next week or years from now, scenarios that play out behind closed eyelids. Time becomes elastic, stretching and contracting according to its own logic, refusing to behave the way it does in waking life. You're here now in this bed, but you're also everywhere. Every when, suspended in a moment that contains all moments. Your breathing slows, deepens, takes on the rhythm of approaching sleep. The thoughts that swirled so actively a moment ago begin to quiet, losing their urgency, their sharp edges softening into something dreamlike. The boundary between waking and sleeping grows thin, permeable, and you slip across it without noticing. One moment conscious, and the next moment somewhere else entirely. The room holds you as you sleep. The walls that have witnessed so many nights like this one. The ceiling that has absorbed the exhalations of generations. Outside, the city continues its existence. The night watch making rounds, the stars wheeling overhead, the harbour waters lapping against wooden hulls. The world does not pause for your sleep, any more than it pauses for anyone's, but it holds space for you, allows you this interval of unconsciousness before demanding your attention again. And so you rest. As so many have rested before you in this place, as so many will rest after you're gone. The troubles of the day cannot reach you here. The fears that haunt your waking hours release their grip, if only temporarily. You are safe. As safe as anyone can be in a world of fire and disease and uncertain fortune. You are home, in the only sense of home that matters, a place where you can close your eyes and trust that morning will find you. The night deepens, the candle has gone out, leaving only darkness and the faint glow of embers in the hearth. The sounds fade one by one, until only silence remains, a silence that wraps around you like another blanket, holding you gently as you drift through whatever dreams may come. Sleep now, rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own demands, its own surprises, its own opportunities for struggle and satisfaction, and all the other ingredients of human life. But that is tomorrow's business. For now, there is only this: the quiet, the dark, the slow rhythm of breath, the gradual surrender to unconsciousness that every human being makes every night, connecting us across centuries and continents and circumstances that could not be more different. The colonists who slept in these rooms 300 years ago felt what you feel now: the heaviness of tired limbs, the comfort of familiar bedding, the release of letting go. They did not know what the future would bring any more than you do. They only knew that they were tired, and that sleep was calling, and that they could not resist its pull. So close your eyes. Let the tensions of this imagined journey dissolve into the quiet. You have walked the streets of colonial New York, smelled its smells, heard its sounds, felt the texture of its daily life. You have met its people, shared their struggles, glimpsed their hopes and fears. Now it is time to leave them, to return to your own world, your own bed, your own sleep. But perhaps you will carry something with you, a sense of connection, an appreciation for how different and how similar life once was, a reminder that the present grows from the past in ways we do not always recognize. The darkness is complete now, velvet and encompassing, asking nothing of you except surrender. Give yourself to it. Let the images of the day fade, the faces blur, the details dissolve into the comfortable fog of approaching dreams. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to think, nothing more to be except a consciousness slowly releasing its grip on wakefulness. Sleep well, dream gently. The morning will come, as mornings always do, bringing light and noise and all the familiar demands of being alive. But that moment is hours away, separated from now by the vast territory of sleep. Cross that territory peacefully, rest in its depths, and know that when you wake, the world will still be there, ready for you, patient and enduring and full of mysteries yet to be discovered. Breathe in, breathe out, let go.